Hello and welcome back to another episode of the War Report. And returning along with me, Constantine Martelli, and my good co-host GSP, Geo has returned. He has graced the show with his presence once
Woo!
again, and we have a lot to cover.
Shabbat
So,
Shalom.
oh yes, Shabbat Shalom. We are a day late, but I suppose any of our fine Jewish viewers who at least are taking
All
themselves
three of them.
seriously, yes, all three of them wouldn't have been able to view this on a Saturday anyway. But happy Monday night to those watching at the premiere. I hope things are going well. Here's to I love Mondays back on the work site. No more nagging wife. Blah blah blah. You know the story. But without further ado, let's get into some of the news of the week. And there's quite a bit out of Ukraine, in which case I'll turn it over to GSP to give us some more precise updates.
Okay, so I will begin with the battlefield update. As usual, now I'll start with the south, go to the east, and then up to the north. So there were a report, including Tisdale. I think Tisdale is one of the um, journalists for The Guardian. He was saying that there were advancements by the Ukrainians across the east side of the Dnieper and Kherson region. There's nothing corroborating that. There's no footage. Like, if you are subscribed to Ukrainian and Russian Telegram channels, you would see that. The other news is, according to the Ukrainians, the, they struck with their HIMARS a military base in Melitopol, which was actually a tourist resort, but they're saying soldiers were staying there. Now, if anybody is really familiar with this war, particularly on the side of Russian Telegram accounts that are hypercritical of Russian politicians and Russian command and the way the war is being conducted, they would know that something went wrong, and you would see the footage. So, according to the Russians, it was just two citizens who were killed. Not just two citizens, but like whatever. I mean, we will get into the Donetsk war theater, but let's move a little bit eastward, and we get to an area called um, I think it's called Novo Velika Polye. So it is on the border of Zaporozhye and southern Donetsk Republic, not the city. It's a little bit west of Ugledar and Marinka. So the Russians have captured the southern part, but the difficult thing about this city is it is flanked by rivers on three of its four sides. So I don't know why they're going for this. This will not be easy to take for sure. All the bridges across the river, which there won't be that many, will be mined or blown up in case the Russians advance any further. So I don't know what the overall strategy is for that. Maybe it's to lure the Ukrainians to send more forces there. At the moment, there still is no Zaporozhye front. The Ukrainians were saying for quite some time that there would be, and there hasn't been. Everywhere else, it's static, as far with two exceptions. Before I get into the exceptions, it is static around that whole area of Diivka, Pesky, uh, where they're surrounding some of the Ukrainian troops. Um, but Donetsk has been shelled now for nearly 72 hours on a constant basis. I think in the last 24, 36 hours, 10 civilians have been killed. There's no there's no rhyme or reason. Generally speaking, the Ukrainians inflict a lot of pain on Donetsk city when things aren't going very well elsewhere. They have issues with shortage of artillery shells, and this is just it's a kind of a sadism. They're also hoping that by shelling Donetsk, some of the militias will lose family members and will cause them to turn back. Something like that happened in the middle of summer this year. Now, the two exceptions, Bakhmut. So the Russians have made several advancements in the last 24 hours, more so than the last time we did the show. So much so that a bridge for a highway M03 linking it with Slavyansk has been destroyed. There is a railroad, but it's not a railroad that the Ukrainians have used in I don't know how many decades. Who knows when. So, but that's not the point. The point is by destroying the bridge, they make both the railroad and the road inoperable. And for them to do that, right? Like obviously they feel now that because of the extra territory gained on the western flank of Bakhmut, that from the north, the Russians could potentially begin to surround the city because the south is done. The Russians south of Bakhmut have taken that territory, and pressure on the west continues to be in the same area and with small recent advancements in the southeast pocket of the outskirts of the city. You're getting more and more reports that the the Bakhmut is so symbolic that they're willing to throw in hundreds of new men into the battle. I love it. It's symbolic. Why is Putin doing this? Okay, then just give up the city.
It's symbolic, it's insignificant, it's small, but they're sacrificing a battalion a day to defend it, though.
Mhm.
That's and the Russians also are using orca human wave attacks. They're kind of like
Yeah.
Wendigos that just go up there. They're just sacrificing themselves.
Every other man with a Mosin.
Literally, at no time in this war by either side has anyone used human wave tactics. No one ever. Neither side. 10 months in, no one has done it. That is just such a stupid fallacy. It's typical Western propaganda. That's not happening. The losses on the Ukrainian side are much heavier. Russia has basically, like, I mean, they have fire control over a lot of their supply routes. But the thing is they know that if Bakhmut falls, then they have to retreat to Slavyansk and Kramatorsk and Krasny Yar. And so they have to go further west. They said that Mariupol was only symbolic. They said that Popasnaya was only symbolic. But capturing Popasnaya is what made it possible for them to capture Lysychansk.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say that the Russians have put in a concerted effort to make more gradual incursions into the city and to begin cutting it off. And I think destroying the bridge, linking it with Slavyansk, because that's a big deal. That's a very big deal. You need fresh supplies from Slavyansk, and to cut that bridge off. To put this in perspective, the bridge is on the absolute north tip of Bakhmut. It's like the next town over to the north is Krasnogora. So it is in that area, if people have a map, where the bridge has been destroyed. You would only do that if you thought like there's a strong potential that you could lose the town, and you would want your enemies to have a difficult time crossing this area or unable to cross this area, which would force them to go further north in order to surround you. So that to me is not an action that you've repelled. The Ukrainians have been unable to gain back any territory that they've lost in Bakhmut for months now. So, but more and more reports we're seeing now of very heavy Ukrainian losses. More and more photos by AP Press are being published. So, people have wondered if the public is being prepared for a Ukrainian evacuation out of Bakhmut. It's possible. But they continue to send in hundreds of men into the region. On most of the Telegram channels, I'm seeing like a real uptick since last month, particularly the last 2 weeks of Ukrainian dead and prisoners. But that's all. Yes, the other exception in the north, from the direction of Kremenaya to Svatove, and all the way in the north where the Russians still have a foothold, a tiny foothold in the Kharkov region near Kupiansk. The Russians have now made more gains there. It was a wish for the Ukrainians, I think, to completely collapse the Lysychansk front and in Lugansk, and maybe take some of those towns back. But that has not transpired. Last week, they lost a little bit of territory. This week, they've lost a little bit more. And I believe there's a highway, the P66, that connects the southern Russian front in that region to the northern front that goes all the way to Kharkov. And that's been restored now. So there's a lot of intense fighting around that area. And a pocket is forming just west of Lysychansk. And Gorlovka, it's not Gorlovka, it's I think pronounced a little differently. But this is a town that's gone back and forth between the Ukrainians 4 times. And it's possible that there's a cauldron now forming for the Ukrainians. Now, really, for the kind of headway that like a lot of people would want the Russians to achieve, they're going to need a lot more men. Putin made a statement this week that about 77,000 troops are on the front line now that were not there in November, or the first 2 weeks of November and earlier. Another 150,000 are expected to come on board. They have another month of training. I said in the last program that depending on what kind of outfit they're in, they'll need 2 to 3 months of training. And also depending on how long they've been out of the military, because these are not conscripts, these are reservists. They've already done recent military service to begin with. As far as the battlefront, that's all I have.
Okay, and I do if nobody else has any further commentary on the battlefront, I just do have a few miscellaneous items regarding Russia and Ukraine, if you guys are ready for that.
Yeah.
So, the reports are that Russian missiles are still being manufactured, despite claims that the sanctions packages implemented at the beginning of the war would cripple their ability to produce missiles by this time. So, this has been a constant narrative that's been going on since the beginning of the war. Russia's running out of missiles, Russia can't produce new missiles, and something that has always been absurd on its face, as we were actually discussing this before the show, but as we've brought many times on the show, Russia is one of the largest arms exporters and manufacturers in the world. So to think that they would have a shortage of missiles similar to a second-rate power is just absurd on the face of it, even by somebody trying to spin an anti-Russian narrative, and it relies on complete ignorance of the general public to even believe something like that, which, of course, they do have in the form of the media, but that's beside the point. The Pentagon...
I'm going to push
Wait,
I'm going to
go
push
ahead.
back a little bit.
Go ahead.
Well, I mean, the Russians did steal all those washing machines. Maybe they're using those chips in the washing machines.
Now that
They're
is
throwing
fair.
bucks
I
at them
did
now.
hear that. I did hear that Saddam Hussein used the PlayStation 2 to build his WMDs. So anything is possible. That's
Apparently, Bin Laden played
that.
Half-Life. So,
Yeah.
whatever Putin's favorite video game is, probably like Stalker.
It's obviously gonna be Counter Strike. Come on.
Yeah, Counter Strike. There you go. The Russians always win, but it is funny. Like that's the marketing of the Ukrainian side by the Western media. Like even on YouTube, you have like what's that guy? Something in Purpose, Hope and Purpose. You have like other people. Like that's the essentially the propagandistic view of like portraying the Russians as basically a backwater, like third world power that, like, kind of like some third world banana republic, terribly overestimates its own power. And there was this line I ranted about this on a Telegram about this Ordinary Things video, and typical like British lib, like Brit popper, they have like such a. I think he's also a self-hating Russian, but it was this video about drones and how there's this one throwaway line. He said, "Well, it's a sign of using drones that Russia refuses to fight the war on the battlefield by targeting civilian infrastructure, and the Lancet drone is useless." Blah blah blah. And I'm thinking, well, why are they targeting civilian power lines? I wonder what strategic military purpose that serves. But it's sort of funny how the narrative is either Russia is refusing to fight and its gains are minimal and it doesn't have the men. Like that was at least initially for the first 6 months. Now the narrative is they're basically Asiatic orcs that are sacrificing themselves in human wave attacks, and that's why they have no tactics, no sense of strike doctrine, and they basically are like a third world banana republic, like Idi Amin throwing waves and waves of men at the Tanzanians or something like that, or or like the Iranians during the 80s. It's like it's like, can they settle on a propaganda narrative? Either they're Asiatic orcs that don't value their own life and they're sending waves and waves of men at the superior white Ukrainian, Teutonic Ukrainians, kind of like that painting that the head of the EU shared in the summer, where it was like the Teutonic Ukrainian knights, who are the actual white people, against the evil Asiatic orcs. Yeah, the orc thing, of course, is Islamophobic, but the leftoids don't care about Islam anymore, so it doesn't really matter in the West. But it's very funny. Propaganda.
We've got a bigger problem. We've got Russian Orthodox orcs.
Oh boy. But that is the narrative, that they're refusing to fight, that really the mindset is that it's essentially like a third world dictatorship where Putin he's banking, like, it's almost like the Russian military, they're cavalier about actually fighting the war. But really, I mean, if you do, unlike some leftoid Britpopper that votes for Jeremy Corbyn, you actually analyze what they're saying. I think that the Russian leadership, they probably do view this as essentially an existential exercise, that they need this. They're going, in their minds, they have to win because they need to win, because it's the future of not just Russia, but I guess you could say it's the future of the global South. And them in China are starting to think in these strategic terms that the the Atlanticist empire that includes alliances with other powers that shall remain nameless, that they are basically a threat to their lifestyle, and that they're conducting the war in such a way that, it needs to be made clear that this is like, Russia's sort of at that sort of crossroads point, the way that they were during the Patriotic War, that, wherever the future lies is going to be determined by what happens in continental Europe here and elsewhere. But I just think like the propaganda around like, oh, well, they're not actually serious about fighting this war. It's like, well, maybe in the beginning you could say that, but now I'm not so sure, especially if there is a huge winter offensive. Now, do I think, that they're going to like take Kiev by going through Belarus? What's that main city there? The city that's like above Belarus and Ukraine, that they could potentially go through and cross cut to Kiev.
Oh, you mean Lvov?
Yeah, well, no, Lvov, yeah, but like, I don't think that's probably their goal. I mean,
I don't think so.
No,
I don't think I don't think the Russians ever had plans to take Kiev at all.
No.
It's one thing to assert pressure, hoping that there will be a division in the ranks of Ukrainian command, and things will fall into place. It's no different than in some ways, the Americans doing regime change. It's a slightly different tactic, but that's what it is. It isn't a commitment, having 150,000 troops for a battlefront that at that time was like over 1,500 miles long is like, I mean, that's why that's why they didn't, the Ukrainians never took it seriously. Um, and that's why there was no break in the ranks. The real miscalculation for the Russians was just how well Ukraine had filtrated all the people that could possibly have sided with the Russians.
Yeah.
And that's all that was, right? I mean, they even killed two of their negotiators in the first month of the war, and came close to like settling on a negotiation in the first days of April,
Right before
as
Boris
we've come
Johnson
to
visited.
learn now. Yeah. So so the Russians never wanted Kiev. Obviously, they were ready for a settlement that would just give them the southern part and the Donbass republics, and that would have been it. So that's why I've always said, to people who thought like, oh, they're going to go all the way to Odessa. I've never seen, I've never seen the real effort by the Russians to do that. I don't think it's there. Um, I think the way they look at it is, look, 60% of our strategic trade happens through our part of the Black Sea and the Azov Sea. And now we have the Azov Sea. And there can be no threat. Because, of course, if the American coup in 2014 had worked and they lost Crimea, economically, Russia would have been finished, right? If that had happened. It would have been very, very, very difficult.
Completely at the mercy of the West at that point, and would have to submit
Yeah,
more or less to any demands that it gave.
right. And so I think they understand what are the pivotal properties in Ukraine to sustain, the kind of economy and strength that they have. And really, like, I think a lot of people get. I guess I don't know if you guys want to get into Merkel's
Well, yeah, I
interview.
wanted to get.
I have that.
Yeah.
I have that on the agenda. But I do have a few other items just to knock
Yep,
out
go ahead.
first. So the Pentagon has given Ukraine the green light to launch drone strikes into Russia proper, and that's not
Oh
including
wow.
the annexed territories because, of course, the Pentagon would consider those still part of Ukraine, whatever. But there also was that one strike pretty deep into Russia. I can't remember the name of the exact city that happened over. Yes.
Engels Military Airport. There was one at Kursk, but nothing happened there that I know of. And the Kursk airport is actually, it's also civilian. It's not a real military airport because civilian planes use it as well. I've flown to different parts of Russia and I've seen airports that have both military and civilian aircraft. So
And of course, with the outbreak of the war, many have probably been adapted. What may have been a civilian airport at one point has
yeah,
probably been
Yeah.
accommodated to military operations as needed. And of course, Kursk is on the fringes. It is very close to Ukraine, but the Pentagon once again has given the green light to send drone strikes into Ukraine. Which, if I had to just say, basic looking at the situation, they want things to go deeper. They want things to be prolonged. I mean, we've said this since the beginning of the war. This has been abundantly clear since the beginning of the war that the goal, if not to topple Russia, at the very least, is to keep them bogged down in this conflict for as long as possible. So, of course, if you can have these continued escalations in the form of that, because before then, they, of course, with the offensives throughout the late summer, early fall, there was a bit of a difference in narrative, but it is an increasing sign of desperation that they're willing to take a gamble to this point where they're willing to sign off on something like this. And also, once again, this is what the headline said. This isn't me reading into it. That the Pentagon gives Ukraine approval. Once again, showing who's really fighting this war and what this war is really about, and that it
yeah.
is a proper proxy war, even according to Western media at this point.
Right, and there was I believe it was the Washington Post. It could be the New York Times, but I believe it was the Washington Post that had an article the day before that Ukraine launched 3 strikes on 3 different Russian Air Force bases in.
One of them had a nuclear plant too attached to it.
Well, I think I don't know if it's a nuclear plant. I think they have nuclear armaments there.
Oh yeah, nuclear armament. Sorry, yeah, yeah.
I think that this is where they put nuclear armaments on the planes themselves.
But
I
they're deep in
mean,
silos. I don't think that'll.
yes, and
Actually,
and from another report I read, those like the nuclear armaments aren't actually at the airport. They have to be brought in, and I don't believe this idea that we're going to enter a nuclear war over Ukraine. So so there was an article in the Washington Post or the New York Times, I forget now. It's been a few days, where basically the Americans boasted that they um, went into the programs of the HIMAR launch system. So it stopped the Ukrainians from being able to fire anything 150 kilometers out from where they were. Now, I think that I think that was said because, of course, they knew that Ukraine would send these old Soviet drones into that area. Remember, one of these drones actually landed not like somewhere in Zagreb in Croatia at the beginning of the war, right? And another one it crossed over Romania and landed in Croatia around Zagreb. And they also shot down a Romanian fighter pilot in Romania with some other missile system. Um, I mean, in the end, the Russians, like, it's a mixed bag. In the end, the Russians still launched a massive strike on Ukrainian infrastructure. You still have cities like Odessa, where 1.3 million are without any power, any electricity or water. Even Zelensky has admitted that over 50% of the territory that they control has no power. But by the same token, the Russians did allow this, fast flying but old drone to enter well into its space. In fact, like Moscow is closer to Ukraine than this Air Force Engels base is. And that's an embarrassment. Like, I think on the front lines now, Russia is quite serious and methodical, but I think for other areas, they're still lax, and I think a lot of that has to deal with trust. I don't know why it is that they trust the West. Uh, I don't think I think Putin gets briefed on this stuff, but I think he probably is dealing with many other issues. So he's leaving it to his command structure to decide what is best.
I mean, if I had to guess, they're assigning far too much rationality to the West in this regard, that they will eventually
yeah.
come to their senses, that they will eventually talk this out.
Yeah,
When
very good
everything that
point.
has happened, I would say since 2014, if you really want to stretch back, has pointed to the exact opposite. And we'll get into
Yeah,
the Merkel stuff too, which
yeah,
more or less puts a nail in that, the final nail in that coffin, at least in my opinion.
yep, yeah. I mean, we've known for a very long time that America just reneges on all of its agreements. Um, there's international law, and that's why they had to invent a different set of laws and rules
The
for
rules-based
this
order.
order. Yeah,
You see, the rules are based on our whims.
yeah,
Yeah, exactly. Even Ping said, like, you said to Biden, you're more or less lying to me. I know that you're lying to me.
right.
It's like, yeah. It's like, But it's funny though, looking at the map, do you think that potentially the Russians, if they regain Kharkov in time, that they could essentially just take all east of the Dnieper, like they could take Poltava and Chernihiv? Like, is that their end goal? That would essentially be victory, would it not? To retain those territories and just basically cut Ukraine from like the east of Dnieper. Like,
I
I don't
think
know.
that depends. I think that depends on how well the Ukrainians fight in the next month or two, right?
Hmm.
Putin, like I saw one report saying that Putin said, this is it. We're not going to do another mobilization. Uh, Some people are saying that there will be another one, and that he hinted that there could possibly be another one. Let's not forget that a lot of the decisions that are made by Putin and by his immediate circle, they do so. The kind of the decisions that they make are because they understand the Russian public. Like the Russian public will say all kinds of things about we should have done this, we should have done that.
But they don't
But
want to
if
do it.
but if at the time, like Russia, like let's suppose Russia called for mobilization sooner. Now, I think they should have called mobilization in the summer. But
Definitely.
let's say they called because it was obvious by the end of July, in the first week, maybe the first 2 weeks of August at the latest, the Russia did not have the manpower to continue gaining, right? Because the more territory that they took, the more spread out they would be. He was already warned in June that if they wanted to keep going, that they would need to mobilize. For whatever reason, Putin thought that the Russian public was not ready to mobilize. And a lot of people said, "Oh, and I'm me included. It should have happened sooner, and it should have happened sooner." But you saw what happened when the mobilization actually occurred 3 months later. This figures like 400,000 men left the country. That's an enormous figure, right? And like so, we'll get into the Merkel stuff. I have other things to say about like
Well,
starting the war sooner.
the other propaganda point that apparently they're saying that basically this is like you know a street sweeper operation by Putin to clear up the homeless people by sending them to the front, like just ridiculous.
Oh yeah.
The British are saying this, that basically Putin's getting rid of the poor and the infirmed by just sending them to the front without any training. Just, I guess, going to give him a Mosin Nagant or something. I don't know. They're gonna,
Every other one gets one.
They're just literally shameless. They're shameless.
Here, go with the bayonet. That's all you get. And to go to the front, march in a human wave like the Iranians did in the 80s, or a barely functioning Kalashnikov. And that's, again, this is like, when they say mobilization, they mean like, I guess like what Ukraine's doing, where they're taking police officers in Kiev and just going to the nightclubs and snatching young men.
Oh, in Ukraine, they just grab any young man on the street. I mean,
Yeah.
We saw those videos all spring and summer. Like any guy on the street, like your game. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, to be fair, they told you on February the 26th that anyone, between 18 to 61 is eligible. Anyone.
But if you were to go to Moscow right now as opposed to Kiev, does it feel like it's a wartime sort of vibe or economy, or just even young men? Like it, I don't know. I think if you go to Moscow, it's basically the same as it was before the war. Yeah. But that's what I mean. I think that it's very interesting. I mean, they could take all of the East if the chips are right, but then
I mean,
yeah.
he's brought it, like I personally, like if we say that 150,000 has always been replenished, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
You can't say the same thing about Donetsk because they've lost probably between them 6,000 men.
Yeah.
Right. About 3,000 apiece. I saw that the figures were close to 2,000 apiece back in June and July. I think it's fair to say that they're like easily 3,000 apiece now. So replenishing them is not going to be easy. Those poor souls have been fighting for 8 years, and I would say 300,000 plus the 70,000 volunteers from the other regions of Russia, like, may not be enough for this idea of taking like everything east of the Dnieper, but avoiding Chernigov, Sumy, Kiev, the further north you go. Again, it's how much is Russia willing to invest in this victory, and I don't see the investment yet.
I think the other question is also how naive are they still about the prospect of negotiation? Because even after everything, as I touched on a little bit before, I still get that there is this sense that they think they can talk a lot of this out at a certain point.
Some of them, yeah, it's perhaps the case, but their regions are non-negotiable. Everything that was sworn in to their constitution and the recognition of those 4 new territories, that's non-negotiable. And I mean, there's no negotiation possible, right?
No.
The Ukrainians will not negotiate until all the Russians leave, even Crimea. And the Russians are like, it's a non-starter. So there's not going to be any negotiation. I think maybe like Constantine, what you're getting at is maybe in the future, when it looks like Ukraine has like literally exhausted the amount of available men that can fight and die, because you see a lot of these prisoners, they're old dudes.
Yeah.
A lot of them are old dudes. And we're just starting winter now, right? Like the mud is just starting to dissipate, and we've winter is basically here. You're starting to see snow in Kiev. You're starting to see snow in some of the more northern territories where there's fighting, but not in the south yet. I think what maybe you're getting at, Konstantin, is if things start to go really badly, the Russians are thinking 300,000 is enough to like bleed them dry, and the rest of the territory can be negotiated.
Or they're banking on a gallows being erected in Minsk and in Kiev by right sector, whoever, if things get totally bad. I think that's another hope of the Kremlin. That, essentially the Ukrainians have too much pride. If they start losing 200,000 men, then by next year, then the Kiev regime would go. I think that's their hope, but I don't know if that's true or not. Yeah. I mean, I'm assuming
it's possible. You have to come to that as a potential conclusion, because I don't think 450,000, 500,000 is enough personally, right? Given the landmass, given the kind of hostility that's been built up after 10 months of war, no. Given the reluctance that's always been there, and again, it's not just Putin, but on an unconscious level, it's the Russian public itself. And only once they have been stirred that they are able to sacrifice more and throw their lot in with the rest.
Do you think that if, like, say, a Ukraine, because the Telegram channels, right? The Ukraino terrorists. Do you think if there was an act of mass terror, say in Moscow, that was at least in part facilitated by America or Britain, that could potentially stir the Russian people to like have their 9/11 moment and like, yeah, we're gonna fight fight them all now? It's like,
no.
I don't know.
I'll tell you why. I think one of the things that Putin is suspecting is inevitably NATO will come into this theater, and it's better to if we understand how important this war is for both sides, then you would have to conclude that NATO would come in. I think even in 2014 there was a fear that NATO would come in if Russia went in. To some degree,
and that was a much more cohesive NATO.
Yeah, so I think the Russians they're waiting for an even bigger war. Personally, like I think the plan is to first of all bleed the Ukrainians dry, and let's see what NATO does next. You would want the bleeding them dry to coincide with tremendous economic difficulty at the same time, right? You would want those two things to happen at the same time. You wouldn't want to bleed them dry when they still have money and resources and they can go in. You would want that to happen simultaneously. There were two former military personnel, officers, who wrote, I forget whether it was Newsweek, By the way, I'm sorry. Last week I said that the Wesley Clark video was done with news. It was CNN. I'm sorry about that. But this one really is Newsweek. So there were two Americans, both of them former Pentagon officers. One of them also served in intelligence. And they're pretty convinced that the Russians are going to do a winter offensive. Now, I think you always have to be, when the Americans talk, I think you always have to wonder if they're telling the truth. Because like most people, I don't believe anything about America. America says Russia's going to take Kiev in 96 hours. I believe that. Right? It's kind of like dealing with the dorks, like the right-wing dorks when it comes to like the WEF. Everything is the WEF. Everything is is Schwab, right? And you know, we had that video that came out this week with
You know that meme of Schwab where he's like, in the future, you're all gonna have anal sex with each other. That's the future.
Tulsi Gabbard was interviewed. She goes, I don't know where people got this idea that I was one of the young leaders of the WF. I've never stepped foot. I've never been like, and I literally told people this, right? Like there are people who they're very paranoid, but they also
wonder
want
who
to
you're
sound.
Subtweeting right now.
Yes.
I can think of a few people.
I'm in a Telegram channel, like a group, and I literally left these chats because I could not deal with like it's very simple for them, right? If this person was in WF, that's it. They're written off, right? And I said, you know, you don't really know for sure if they are in WEF, okay? You don't know that. Putin's WF, and it's like Putin got kicked out of WF into like the day after the invasion. We don't like, I don't know, nobody's shown me the proof. I'm not saying it's not there, but you know, one meeting, one handshake with these people does not mean like he's WF. And if he was like if he was like a young leader, like when in the 90s when he worked as a cab driver in St. Petersburg, like when?
Well, I'm glad you brought up the WEF because that brings me actually into the next point I wanted to cover. Whereas we've, of course, discussed this topic on the show before and how the WEF largely exists to be a punching bag. Now, I'm not going to defend any of the people
Yeah,
that are affiliated with it, but they're the ones put out there that take the flack while other organizations do work in the background. Other organizations like the IMF, which we have out of Russia a draft law within the Russian
yes,
legislature to withdraw Russia from the IMF. So
beautiful.
that has not gone anywhere yet because it still is a fresh item that needs to develop over the coming days and weeks. But it is signaling that we are getting once again a further disconnect of Russia from the system insofar as they were involved in it in the first place, and that it is a further drifting away. And seeing as how closely all these organizations are affiliated, it is showing that rather than what many people, and I don't necessarily blame them for this initial reaction that, oh, this is just two sides bickering, this is internal fighting,
Yeah,
this is a
you
whole
know why they
controlled
do
op
it?
thing.
Yeah, and they never think it through. It's like I'll tease some of them like in real life. I said, you know why they do this? Why they make these elaborate wars and everything? They stop. They can't wait for my answer. I go, because you're very smart. You see, you see right through it. You could start a whole populist uprising, and they're afraid of you.
If I go to Buffalo Wild Wings, the regime fears me.
Yeah, like as soon as like all I said was like what every stupid grifter has been telling them for like decades. But if I say it and I act really serious, they like suddenly they have this illumination that happens. It's they are so tiresome, so tiresome.
No, but really, it's just to bleed out the population of young white men. That's probably why. But the Russians aren't white though, so in the rhetoric, so it's like I don't get it. Maybe the WEF knows that the Russians are actually white, and that's why.
Like I mean, we have COVID vaccines now for children as young as 6 months. Like Oh, yeah, that's right. You're so smart and see through things, and you can stop anything, and the Constitution is on your side. Like, get real. Get real. Everybody knows about the excess deaths now. They all know that none of the vaccines worked. The masks didn't work. Like, get real that they would have to go to these elaborate means, like just to put one over you. Like, you know, they don't think about you. They don't think about you that much. It's so retarded.
Yeah, it
No, but
creates
I
a lot
think
of
to that point,
unnecessary layers to when really you just need one simple statement is they hate you and everything that you stand for. They think nothing more about that, and they do what they
Yeah,
want because you have no
yeah.
power. And that includes
right.
us. I don't think this show of 900 some subscribers has any great influence. Look, it's fun. I appreciate you all, but we're not changing the world or anything.
Whoa, 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 whoa.
Man,
It's an archive. It's
you
for
mean
the future.
subscribing to my Patreon's not going to change the world?
Well, I don't know. Might help. It
It
can't
might
hurt.
help a bit.
Give this man your money. He might. That might be the final piece of the puzzle that we need.
Exactly. Yeah. This is how I'm going to fund the Infowar. No, but to I love when Alex Jones used to like shill his products and he would say, "You're buying funds in the Infowar. You're buying more bonds in the Infowar. You're buying Tangy Tangerine and Pollen Burst. You're buying bonds in the Infowar." By going to my Patreon, patreon.com/Johnny Productions, you are buying bonds in the content renaissance. There you go. That's what I say. But to your point, though, it is funny. I think, okay, the anti-white thing is probably, like, okay, why is it, okay, why is it that they need sort of, I get the idea of full spectrum dominance, having been in these sort of, conspiracy circles for many years, having like, exactly, I believe I've been listening to Alex Jones for what, like 12, 15 years now.
Yeah.
But, that being said, I think that the simplest explanation being that they probably have fomented existing ethnic hatreds is like the Occam's razor here. I mean, this is obviously what happened with every single color revolution. It's happening in Iran right now. Of course, that's not ethnic based. That's, women's rights. And with Russia, it's very simple. It's very simple that everyone from the moment that they drew the map in the early 90s, they said that this was inevitable. This is always going to happen. And I think that, without, again, being fully aware of the fact that, Russia is probably not the based world paradise, there is something to be said that if you don't, at least if you don't tacitly agree that the rest of the world is probably getting tired of the Anglo-Americans, then what are you going to do? You're just going to blackpill forever and say that, there's no hope. You can't do anything about it. No world power that has the financial and the military resources to essentially blow a hole in the full spectrum dominance of the GAE. It's impossible. It's futile. Oh, but by the way, if you just have a populist constitution-based uprising and go to retard rallies in real life, then you might change the regime internally.
Yeah. Oh, that'll work.
That'll work. Not Russia fighting a frontline war against a major NATO power, all but in name only a NATO power. But no, it's like you going on BitChute and Odyssey and Telegram. That's going to change the world. Not Russia.
You look at the laws that Russia is introducing right now, that they are like, it is literally like, there were Western states that had those laws on the books.
Yeah.
Now they didn't really enforce them, but they had them about up until the late 60s.
Hell, later in some
which
cases.
Right? Like, so, like, yeah, I know for the Westoids that you're talking about, like, nothing is ever good enough.
Of course.
So they are doing that. Like, somewhere along the way, it was possible, if the right people were in the right places, you could argue that Russia would have crumbled into various balkanized states.
Oh, most definitely.
But it didn't. And like, you have to ask yourself, why didn't that happen? for many countries, it would have happened if they had to go through what Russia went through. Just giving just the history of Russia from 1914 to 1991, or you could go to 1914 to 1999, that 85, 86-year period. Like
In
a lot
short,
of
the 20th
countries,
century.
they literally, like, those countries would have been finished. It would have been completely over for them.
Yeah.
You have to ask yourself, why didn't that happen? Right? Anyhow,
No, but even the
I don't
history
want to go.
between America and the Soviet Union, I mean, there's always those theories that like America secretly funded the Soviets and that was like, it was largely a creation of Wall Street. But then there's other people that have debunked that info from people like Sutton, and it's a complicated history. I mean, at least initially, there was cooperation. There was sort of periods within the Soviet history that they worked together, and that it probably was sort of like,
as soon as World War II was over, Russia was no longer America's democratic friend. You can find the newspaper clippings, the magazine covers, where the Soviet Union was America's democratic friend. But I would say there were already rumblings, like the only reason the Americans didn't start with the negative press campaign against the Soviet Union in the 30s, in 1936, when for the first time, Russians were not the leading group that was overrepresented going to the gulags, and it was finally other groups that were also overrepresented, or overrepresented more than them. So from, now I don't know if there were official gulags in 1918. I think they didn't really get constructed until the 20s, but you're looking at a period that's like basically at least a decade or a decade and a half. And for the first time, the Russians were not overrepresented. That could have been like the moment when the Americans began getting scared. And it has to deal with Stalin, because, essentially he was going rogue. And this allowed for ethnic Russians to regain the empire, because for the first 15, 20 years, that empire was ostensibly anti-Russian, right?
Yeah.
Like people talk about the Jays
Oh,
that were
it was a minority coalition.
overrepresented in intelligence, but the Lithuanians were overrepresented in the high commands of the KGB and the NKVD.
They were absolutely brutal towards Muscovites and other.
Yeah. So it's not like they had their revenge, and it's like they could be communists, they could be Nazis. It didn't matter as long as they got to kill Russians, so they could support any side.
Well, his name I always butcher the pronunciation of, but the founder of the Cheka was a Polish officer who defected to the Reds.
Yes. Yeah. So. I mean, a lot of conservative normies, like I know some of them in my own personal life, the kind of people who non-denominational Christian, and they think like maybe the American Constitution should be like in the Bible. I don't know. you know the type that I'm talking about.
The so Sean Hannity viewership.
So like they're not even that. They're just like it's like America really is this idol for them, even though they're Canadian. And
the Ezra Levant viewership.
Yeah, like they don't. No. Like I'm actually. Yeah, they watch that stuff too, but they're not Levant's people. I'm just saying that they're not aware of any of this information. I remember talking to a high school friend of mine about this, and he was like in shock. He was in shock that like this kind of ethnic rivalry could exist within an empire, right? And I don't know why, like he recognizes that's the case in America and the West, but it never occurred to him that could be also true in the Soviet Union. It just boggles the mind.
That's every empire. The Romans had ethnic struggles. I mean, against the Southerners and against the Thracians.
Yeah.
It's practically the definition of an empire.
But then when you tell them this, then what happens usually?
Oh, honestly, they're speechless. They're speechless. They're like the friend of mine I'm talking about. His name's David. He couldn't process it. He just couldn't process it.
But then there was a theory that like Stalin de-emphasized, for example, the various language groups within the Soviet Union. And of course, he was a Georgian. That was always like a sticking point. But yet, he did hand the ethnic Russians like immense control of the empire.
Because the Soviet Union would be finished.
Yeah.
It would have like the Balkanization that the West would have wanted would have happened under Trotskyist Sovietism.
Oh, no doubt.
If it wasn't for him, and that's why he had to, like, he made a choice basically whether to dissolve the Soviet Union or not. On some level, Stalin is like in broader terms a Russian on some level.
Yeah.
Russia as a civilization, not Russia as a country or an ethnicity. At some level, he knew that. Now you could be really pragmatic and say like, well, like, this place is really going to turn to shit if I like let all these little warring groups, continue to assault the majority, and it will just divide the country inevitably. It will just make it easy to destabilize.
Which
so I can't let that
Russian
happen.
History, like the Tatars going through like the Russian peasantry, like that's happened before. He knew that.
Yeah. Yes, and so in that sense, like he saved them, and it brought back Russian rule eventually.
Well, even the
it
birth
still
numbers,
took a long time, but like, pardon me.
Well, but even the birth numbers, like really quickly, like if you were to look at, let's call them founding stock Americans, right? Let's Anglos, Germanics, maybe Scottish, maybe certain other ethnic groups that are present there. But let's say the WASP, the Anglo-Saxon. Now, in that period of history, in the Soviet Union versus the American capitalist, for all intents and purposes, an empire, the stock of ethnic Muscovites and ethnic Russians has grown during that period, numerically. Can you say the same for ethnic founding stock Americans from, let's say, the 50s to the late 80s, the early 90s?
America's not founded Stalin. It needs a Stalin.
Oh, exactly. Who?
America's Stalin will be Mexican.
Maybe. No, it has to be. But like the ethnogenesis in America.
I don't mean necessarily Fuentes, but I'm just.
Oh no.
Well, he likes to think he's Stalin, so that's no. But I mean, if you look at, this is one thing that a lot of the white nationalists who are pro-Russian, like Eric Stryker, this is what they say. When you actually look at it, the actual demographic stock of those ethnic Russians has increased as opposed to the founding stock of America or other foundings like Britain.
That's right.
Like,
that's right.
How many, like, what percentage of white people are in London? City of London, what, 40%?
I heard 37%.
Oh God.
Like, but sometimes like they have like three ways of dividing that aggregate. Like, for instance, they'll say white, but white, like, is it white British Isle white? Is it white just English but not Welsh or Scottish or Irish?
Yeah.
Or is it white just meaning European?
Yeah, like Polish people would be included.
Yeah.
I don't know if you'd include Romas, but like, basically, a lot of Polish people, a lot of Russians went to England. Yeah. It's like it hovers above 40%, let's say. And every other capital in the Western world, I hate to say it, is going that way. I mean, what percentage of white people are in Toronto right now, Goran?
It's like 46, 45, 44%.
Yeah. And,
I mean, if you take people in Toronto know this, or people in Southern Ontario know this. If you take the TTC, our people are probably max 30%.
I think just in terms of white Americans in general, Washington, D.C. is just under 50%, which is good compared to most other white countries.
Yeah. But that's an exception, though.
Yeah.
America will, like most things, like religion, conservatism, they're pretty much the exception in the Western world. But, I mean, the point being is that you have to, like, look at these things. Now, I think that Russia probably is heading for a demographic crisis like anything else, everyone else. And I think maybe Putin knows this. And I think that's why the impetus of doing this war now is probably in a bid to like maybe reverse it. I think like Putin honestly probably did believe in the Russian ethnogenesis theory that the Ukrainians, the Belarusians, that they're the same as them, and that we should unite against the evil. I mean, he's not that way. Like he's like, oh, we should unite against the evil West. Like, he's not a Duginist, but I think that he probably had an idea that the Ukrainians will quote unquote come home, at least those southern eastern people. But I mean, well, we all know that that's probably not going to happen. At least west of Dnieper. But
yeah.
Anyways, I think we interrupted your minutia minute.
No.
I thought we were
I
still
didn't
in the
have a
minutia
minutia
minute.
minute.
Trench foot, mass casualties. What else? Soon to be known as Zatomorsk again. But go ahead.
I think you should go, Konstantin, because we were working towards Angela Merkel's
Yes, we
interview.
were, but I missed a key piece of information. I missed a certain name in the minutia minute, and I think you know who I'm talking about.
I don't know.
Where is our Arestovich news? We have not had it in weeks.
I
have
not heard from Arestovich.
This is bad. This is the worst news of the war, frankly.
He's very quiet right now.
That's a real shame. But yeah, as you were saying, getting back on track, just a couple of news items to round out before we get into the comments about Merkel and the implications of that. There is going to be a meeting before year's end between Putin and Lukashenko in Moscow. You did have Lavrov make comments to Kazakhstan that Russia needs to move away from the dollar and the euro in its agreements, so you see that furthering of separation from the West and Western currencies and the Western economic system. And with that, you also do have what we've been leading up to, the statements by Merkel regarding the Minsk agreement. Now, if I just had to put it in one sentence, Merkel had more or less came out and said that, well, the Minsk agreements never really meant anything. Nobody really had any intention of following them, least of all us. So, this also echoes back to some comments that came out from Poroshenko, I believe right before he left office or right after he left office, saying that, well, the Minsk agreements just needed to buy us 4 or 5 years so we could build up an army to actually challenge Russia and dislodge them from our territory, do X, Y, and Z. But it goes back to the fact that from all of this, the Minsk agreements, which were initially put in place to prevent Ukraine from completely imploding into civil war with Russian intervention back in 2014, back in 2015, and I mean they even had to renege those and create a Minsk 2.0 agreement. But to no one's surprise, at least I'm not surprised, and I doubt either of you is surprised about this, it was a completely meaningless document. It was something that had really no results except, once again, staving off this war until Ukraine could receive the proper funds and training needed to actually fight Russia. Now, of course, the picture painted by somebody like a Poroshenko, referencing his previous comments from about a month and a half ago, would have signaled a much more fierce Ukrainian force, but nonetheless a Ukrainian force that can at least hold off Russia and can at least give us sort of what we've seen thus far. But this is one of those things that should be the final nail in the coffin to the Russian idea that there is a diplomatic solution to this, that there is some sort of settlement or agreement to be reached with the Western powers, that something can be talked about. Because even Merkel, whose policy when she was in office at least pointed to a deepening cooperation with Russia via projects like Nord Stream 2 and other energy projects as well, even from the mouth of Merkel, that was all for naught because of what was said and because more or less showing German compliance in the escalation of this war. And what we did on our previous episode, of course, when we had George McMillan on, which I'm glad you all appreciate that. Once again, it was great, and hopefully we can get him back soon because there's still a lot more we need to dig through with that. But it shows that once again the German leadership is acting in the interest of the American empire, sabotaging any integration efforts between them and Russia. And I think these last comments really just exemplify the entire history of all of this since 2014. And I really have no other words for it that beyond I'm not really shocked by this. A lot of people were, and I could see if you didn't keep up very intensely with this why you might be. But just given the circumstances, once again, since the Maidan, while it is newsworthy, I can't really find anything too shocking in it.
I mean, it's opened up a whole bunch of questions. Her statements, especially about what was Russia thinking. I'm going to go against the orthodoxy in the way that this has been interpreted, and that is Russia should have gone in 2014. I do disagree with that, and I'll tell you why.
Just for the record, I also disagree with that. I'm with you on that.
Yeah, so a lot of people don't recall that because of the sanctions that were imposed on Russia in 2014 and 15, the Russian ruble crashed momentarily in September, right? Now, I was in Russia in April and May of 2015, and I returned again in May of 2016. Life didn't seem that different to me. But apparently that did happen, and Russia had to radically reorientate its spending in order to, not tank, essentially, right? And I think there was an estimation by the West that if the sanctions hurt Russia enough, right, that they will eventually get what they want, which is Crimea, right? One of the reasons why Putin, in a sense, was not interested in the Donbass was only going to nominally help them defend themselves for obvious political reasons, but was never interested in investing in Russia the way he did in Crimea, is because Crimea is pivotal. It is the most important part of former Ukraine there is, period. Particularly to the Russians, but for anybody else who controls that region. So definitely Donbass was a secondary concern. The other reason I disagree with the take that they should have gone in is a lot of people who get very angry about that, again, they're the kind of people that forget that if mobilization was called right away or after the first 3 months of the war, there probably would have been an even bigger exodus out of Russia. So I don't think that they're always being honest with themselves. If Russia had no alternative at that time, all credit cards were American run, right? It is also doubtful how much the Chinese would have been willing to help them. Remember, the Chinese had not secured Hong Kong at this point. We don't know. The war in Syria was going on. Saudi Arabia and Qatar were major funders of that war. It's not that they're not now, but they're much less. And there are probably other entities that are supporting the jihadists in Syria right now.
And they
And
were
the
also
Chinese
on
will
much
probably
more.
persuade the Saudis.
Pardon me?
Go ahead,
Gio?
Gio.
No, I was going to say the Chinese will probably now persuade the Saudis to lessen up on Syria because they're still tacitly supportive of Assad. Yeah.
Right. And so I did not see in 2014 the kind of, like, I'm frankly surprised the kind of very rapid integration that is forming around Russia and China right now after this war started. I'll be honest with you, when the war started, based on everything I could learn in all of January and February about the sanctions that were imposed on Russia in 2014 and 15, that the new sanctions would not destroy Russia, right? But I'll be frank with you, I really didn't know what would happen in the first month. And, that was the miscalculation on the West, because I think the West calculated that they could probably get what they want without like direct involvement by just ruining Russia's economy, and eventually that they would get the kind of leaders that they had been hoping for.
A Navalny.
Yeah, like, 'cause remember there were big protests in Moscow in 2011, right? So that's just 3 years, 2.5 years before all the chaos erupted in Kiev. So my view is, why is Merkel saying this? Merkel is
A lizard creature.
Yes, she's partly saying this to hide some of her cross purposes in working with Russia. And what I mean by this is Germany has basically no autonomy except maybe, well, it's over now, but Germany had no autonomy in any sector of its life except the economic. And I think her sweet talking Putin into building Nord Stream 2 gives away the plot of what she was really up to. Now, she knew Minsk would never be kept, that the Ukrainians would never recognize it. Remember, this was recognized by the Security Council, that including the US, France, and Britain. So this was international law. There goes, as I've always said, the UN is a false neutral. But the perception of neutral is important for the post-Enlightenment idea of objectivity.
Exactly.
And truth. So,
and the retards still believe it on the political left. So that's
yes, and on the political right. Oh, the UN is doing this. They subjugated America, dude. America is the UN. What are you talking? So, what era are you living in? Anyhow, so my belief is that Russia, like if they imposed the kind of sanctions that they imposed on Russia in 2014,
it would have been finished.
They would have been finished.
But also,
we'll never know for sure what they would have done, but they would have been finished. Remember, food, all kinds of trade was stopped just because of that war. When I went to Russia, people did talk about that. Now, I went to the supermarkets in Moscow and St. Petersburg, and they're wonderful. They're really well stocked. Anybody who's been there knows like the prices are incredibly reasonable and all that.
Cashier women don't look transmogrified like in America or Canada.
Yeah. They don't look trans anything. So
maybe trans Caucasian.
Trans Caucasian, yeah.
Ouch.
Maybe an Uzbek woman will bag your groceries.
Yeah. So I would say her motive was to align herself with the West, even though she knew. It's interesting. The interviewer said, you are probably aware that you both created crises and put out crises. To which she replied something to the effect of, "Well, my life is in politics, so that's what I'm used to," and so on and so on.
Well, she has no children too. That's another thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think she's trying to play the badass boss girl. I deceived Putin. But God. I mean,
bad bitch.
Yeah, I'm such a bad bitch. Look what I did.
Yeah, just wait until Putin brings his dog to the next meeting.
Yeah, I mean, like, then why did you ask for a pipeline?
Starburst at her.
She has to do this balancing act basically between like what's good for Germany and what's good for America, and she did that until America could just not tolerate where the last 10 years were going up until September 2022. That's really what this comes down to, and this entire war is about that. And she's concealing that fact by drawing emphasis on how she lied to Putin. But I think Putin's decision has far more to do with fear of what the reprisals would be, fear of how well the Russian public would have been. Like, yes, the Russian military could have gone in there. Remember, the Russian military also 8 years ago was not as good as it is now.
I was going to say that.
Yes, and so I mean, we're looking at it. We were talking about its industrial capacity, and you can tell that they too were preparing for this war. Now they had different scenarios about how they were going to accomplish politically, how they were going to get the kind of political outcome with a use of both politics and force. They haven't turned out that way, but that said, they too have been preparing because they've noticed that Ukraine has been prepared for 8 years.
Yeah. No, but materially, I think if you look at the history as well, like I have a longer rant about Merkel based on this recent alleged coup attempt by some based monarchists
yeah.
about Germany's situation. But we'll get to that. But materially, if you look at the history, the Russian army, I say Russian army because I mean you could say even the Red Army in the 80s before, was essentially picked clean in the 1990s by corrupt commissars and by corrupt oligarchs that were, Victor Bout, is a good example of sending arms, halfway across the world. Millions of people, millions must die in, Congo. The war was fueled. The mini world war that happened in the Congo was basically fueled by Russian arms. And also, when you look at the sanctions by any other name, economic sanctions by the corrupt oligarchical officials and by various Western powers stripping the Russian economy clean in the late 90s up until the 2000s, up until Putin, and the situation that Russia was in during the, when America was distracted by the Iraq War and Afghanistan, they were fighting the Georgians with essentially ex-Soviet equipment. And when it comes to the retooling of the Russian military-industrial complex, this didn't happen up until after Maidan. They were still a Russian army that largely relied on whatever Soviet equipment that oligarchs couldn't strip clean from them. So
very good point.
Yeah, and so if they were to have gone in 2014, they would essentially have been fighting by any other means a NATO-trained and NATO-equipped army. The Ukrainians would have had a superior advantage in terms of their tactics, in terms of various.
If NATO had gone in big, if
they would have gone in,
the Ukrainian army was very small at that point. Now there were lots of mercenaries. There were definitely Western advisors, but let's say
there was the right-wing paramilitary groups.
If the West had reacted the way it did
in 2014,
this year in 2014. And that includes and that includes the sanctions. There's just no way out. I mean, maybe the first 2 months they would have been really successful, but what then, right? Like they would have
easily exhausted their military capacity by the first 2 months. Yeah, no doubt.
Not to mention, like, how would they approach China? I think for China, like, big lessons had to happen to China. For China to begin working so closely with Russia, and Hong Kong was one of them, and other areas where the Americans are trying to obstruct China's reach is another. It's just putting the battlefield aside, everything else around this conflict is far easier for Russia now than at any other time. I mean, its economy is, like a lot of people said, the best years of Russia's economy was like 2013, 14. It's better than it was then. Before the ruble crashed.
But that's relative to their position in the late 90s. Like, what do they mean by it was the best in 2014, 15? Like, it's relative to the act.
It's relative, but there are metrics like men don't die in their 50s. Men don't die in their 60s. That's a big deal.
Abortions dramatically went down at that time as well.
Right. And like 2016 is when life expectancy in the United States began going down, including for whites. So we've been on that trend now for 6 years.
And even alcohol consumption by liter per country is higher in many Western European countries than it is in Russia now.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
That's absolutely incredible. But I forget, Constantine, you may enlighten me. What was Obama's relation to China at the time? The late Obama years, was he pretty amicable, or that was still like? Because I know like a lot of the like normie right wing narrative, that was like the crystallization of the narrative that China was going to overtake the West and China's evil and they're still communists, and like Sean Hannity talking about the Chinese. What was Obama's relation to the Chinese at the time as well?
Well, Obama's entire foreign policy goal, at least that he stated explicitly in his second term, as I'm sure you recall during the 2012 debate, he
Oh
finger
yeah,
wagged
yeah.
at Romney for calling Russia an adversary, which conservatives salivated at as soon as Crimea got taken by Russia, blah, blah, blah. But his entire thing was the pivot to Asia, and looking at it in retrospect, it was America's last attempt at trying to sway the Chinese back into our
Mm,
camp. And you have to keep in mind, from everything from Syria to Libya to many of Obama's foreign policy decisions, he had Brzezinski, or at least Brzezinski's acolytes, in his ear the whole time, and that was a large driving force on the Obama foreign
that's
policy,
right.
from
Yeah.
Syria to Iran to Libya to China and Russia. So it, in retrospect now, of course, again at the time, you
Up
couldn't
until
have
he
looked.
died, right?
Yeah,
Brzezinski.
more or less. And funny enough, he did die 2 months into Trump's first term, so it's as
Oh,
if
he was spared the horror of having his world stripped from him. Oh,
uh, that was very
I
symbolic
cry every time.
in my opinion. But I, looking at it from 2022, it was really that last chance to try to get China back on board with the Chimerica agreement and trying to divide
The
power.
Chimerica thing, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah,
You know what? I just picture Obama talking to like stupid Republicans, going, "You shut up with the whole Russia is the enemy. We got to sweet up China first, then we go after. What is wrong with you? Why are you guys so low IQ? I don't get it."
Why do you have that same Ronald Reagan poster with the cowboy hat? Oh, that they showed that in Moscow, by the way. No, they showed that in Beijing too. The cowboy hat, Ronald. That's why the Chinese loved Ronald Reagan, because he was like a cowboy. But but it's funny though how like Sleepy Joe, Creepy Joe, how Brandon, that was like basically the conservative talking point, that he would be like kind of like what Trudeau, or who do they got now in Australia? What's his name? Her name? His name?
uh,
Oh,
is it that Spike guy, or did he get kicked out? That's so
I
far in the
forget.
hinterlands. I can't really keep up with a lot of the things in
Yeah.
Australia, but I know New Zealand has like the insane
Jaka.
Oh, her.
Jana. What's her name? Jaka.
like
Jana.
are dead or something like that.
But they call
Yeah,
her mama.
the horse face girl.
Yeah, yeah.
Which one?
Which, oh, brutal. Oh man, they have a whole horse farm in Auckland.
You know, we do not have a huge female following.
I wonder why. I wonder why.
Look, but the ones who do, they love us.
But they have female Asperger's. Though, so.
Misogynists
but-
are so based.
The most powerful woman race, the Aspie.
They're more based than an Azov woman. But no, what I was going to say is that the Republican talking point during the last years of Trump was that essentially it was going to be like Australia, or especially like Canada, where China was going to rule, China Joe, China Brandon, that he was going to be like essentially just a plant for Beijing and for Xi Jinping. But really, when you think of it, who has snubbed, which American leader has snubbed China more in recent decades? Fucking Brandon. So
Yeah.
it's like, it's that backfired. The narrative like backfired. You know, Brandon's actually not been very good for Xi Jinping. So I think that's probably another impetus why the Chinese are trying to hoodwink, you know, Saudi Arabia from them, why they're offering access to the Mir card to other places behind America's back. Because what is America going to do realistically? I mean, they're already talking about supplying arms to Taiwan. What arms are left besides eating away at like the stock that, you know, actual American soldiers are going to use? Like it's incredible.
But we're the arsenal of democracy.
If only Blumpf had met Xi Jinping wearing a cowboy hat.
I know. If only that were to happen, then we wouldn't have this.
I mean, Trump is a pretty unconventional diplomat, if you want to call it that. But the truth is, they liked him. I
What
mean,
period of China do you like, Trump? Do you like the Song Dynasty? I like all of them. All of them are great. Every period of China. Boxer
they're all
Rebellion,
great.
all of great. All of it. The best.
These goldfish are huge. That was in Japan, but
Goldfish are huge.
but remember Trump's visit to Saudi Arabia?
Oh, where he touched the orb?
Yes, the glowing orb.
Yeah.
That was off the charts. That was, what is this timeline I'm on level? It was so insane. Because we were all riding high after his victory in the election. Then he goes to Saudi
The
Arabia.
Heil victory speech.
He's touching this orb with these other men wearing classic Arab garb, and they're all like, oh.
This was Rene Gugnon's prophecy, by the way.
Look, it's just some fun Magian sorcery with the boys. What's the big deal?
Faustian man.
But as much as Trump kind of was like low IQ with everything, he really did know about business. I mean,
yeah,
the Saudi Arabia situation was stable. He gave the Knesset, the throwaway symbolism of oh, well, it's Jerusalem now. But really, I mean, relations with China, Xi Jinping more or less got along with him. Putin certainly got along with him. I mean, Trump was pretty good for American business.
You got to go
when
to
it comes down.
What was it, the Forbidden City?
Yeah, exactly. Like, people thought that Obama was going to be like, oh, Obama, not only was he going to racially heal the nation, but he really, remember the declining years of Obama? He's going to be the foreign policy president. Remember that bullshit?
I do.
He's going to not do the mistakes that Bush did. It's like the total opposite of the truth happened. Like, he was not the foreign policy president. If anything, he was sort of like America isolating itself, relatively. And then everyone thought that, well, Trump's isolationism was going to hurt America. But really, Trump, more or less had good relations with otherwise American, foreign policy enemies or rivals. And it's just, if anything, you could say the good part about Trump, besides the Supreme Court thing, would be that. I mean, it's a meme, but it's true that this war probably wouldn't have happened if there was another, 4 more years. But yeah,
it's highly likely. I mean, the only praise Trump ever got was lobbing a few cruise missiles into Syria.
Yeah.
And then by the second time that he did it, people caught on that he was being intentionally ineffective, which angered the Israelis.
Remember the wave of strikes the week after the 2018 U.S. attack, where it was from. Okay, so that attack was on a Friday night, which would have been Saturday morning Syria time. But I was keeping up the updates at the time, and it was just that Saturday onward, throughout the rest of that week, just daily Israeli strikes on Syrian positions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they were pissed off about that, and that has only continued. And it is funny because while Trump was intentionally impotent about those, the Israeli strikes that have happened in the past few years have also exuded the same level of impotence, but I'm not sure it's as intentional as when Trump did. But that's a whole different topic. I do have some Syrian news that we'll get into in a little bit here, but because you had brought it up, the alleged coup in Germany.
Yes.
No.
So that's
Beast.
I'm sure you all heard about that. That was when the claimant to whichever one of the deposed royal families, I think it was the last one from the Kaiser's line, him and a handful of people. Now, again, the plot was ultimately a chat between some right-wing military and police officers and this crown prince. This isn't the first time something like this in Germany has happened. This is the first time it's involved somebody of such a quote-unquote high profile. But they've busted so-called far-right rings within German police and military before that were allegedly plotting a coup. So this is a rather routine thing. They just decided to spice this one up where they had him. Of course, it was somehow connected to the whole Q thing. They were sure to mention that. They showed no evidence. They showed no real connection, but that was something that was brought up. And, I mean, I wish it would have been true.
Do you want to know the kayfabe behind all of this?
These are all old.
Yeah,
aren't 10 of the 25 over 65?
They're old men.
Yeah.
Yeah.
None of them owned weapons. None of them have any influence with the media. All of them are retired,
yeah.
so they have no influence really with the military. Now, to be fair, do you remember a few years ago there were a bunch of German police in East Germany? Uh, I don't mean eastern part of Germany. Like let me put it that way. Um, who were arrested. I think like there is a nugget of truth, right?
They liquidated
And,
the whole police force, if I recall.
yes, yes. And this is why this event will seem plausible even without evidence, because it will seem old hat, right? That's why it will be ignored.
Oh
But
yes, the one you're referring to a few years back had far more weight behind it. So this one is a rehashing of that with far less weight. But because something like this happened before, it set a precedent that, well, of course there's far-right infiltration into the police and military. This is something that we need to take seriously. And after that first attempt, which, again, had more weight to it than this one, but the likelihood of any amount of success was pretty low, it it does create that where they can have a routine cleaning of house in the police and military and weed out any elements that may have even the slightest bit of disloyalty.
Yeah.
mm-hmm.
But it's like, here's the thing though. Here's the greater picture of it. Okay, so when it comes to Germany, like for example, when they dissolved that whole special forces unit, because apparently in Germany, to even want to join the military is highly suspicious, to say the least. Germany has become, and again, this is the work of people like our good friend Thomas 777, that essentially Germany's become a ideological linchpin of the post-war driving ideology of the West, which is essentially anti-fascism.
Yeah.
Now, if you look at Germany, if you look at what the German government funds in terms of manufacturing this quote unquote far right element within the military and with the police force, these are not far right people, by the way. These are not. And we know the kayfabe. So to bring this to an international, specifically to an American ideological battleground, the German government funds people, these research groups and these tracker groups. Now, one person, I'm not going to name his name because of, in fact, I actually appeared on the list that he came up with.
Oh, that one.
Yeah, well, if you look at, if you're an aficionado of Twitter, you know this fucking rat weasel piece of shit that the German government funds to essentially manufacture right-wing hate groups everywhere and to make lists and maps, and who also was working, by the way, with Jannies behind the scenes in Twitter before Elon Musk said namaste and cleared them all out, okay? The German government actually funds these groups. And if you are a person on Twitter who has gotten a strange email saying that the German government has flagged your content, but the Twitter has found that you're not in violation of the rules, I actually had one of those emails.
To my eternal shame, I've never had one after 5 years.
Yeah, well, it's funny because most of us have had, actually. It's because the German government funds these quote unquote tracker anti-hate groups into the US. And now notice how they had to tie this monarchical Prussian attempted coup, which we know is probably, I wouldn't be shocked if this wasn't the case, that if the German government was just essentially making shit up. They had to tie this to Q boomers, more or less, because that gives them justification that there's this so-called international right-wing shitlords unite to overtopple these, wholesome Chungus anti-fascist governments like the German government currently. That there's this international conspiracy, this vast right-wing international conspiracy, and that the German government needs to fund people like that fucking rat piece of shit that I'm talking about, who will remain nameless, but you probably know who I'm talking about. That they need to fund anti-FNUC groups around the world to track these evil far-right accounts because look, they tried to coup the government. And they're actually being funded by Russia, even though the German government had to begrudgingly admit that the Russians didn't even care about them, or they didn't even know about this group with the ties to the Junkers and, you know, to the former royal family. This is the sort of greater picture of why the German government's doing this, because not only are they a vassal state of America now, but they are laundering ideological currency for the global, the global homo anti-fascist ideology that has gripped the Anglo-Americans for the better part of 80 years now. This is the greater scheme of it. This is why this is, receiving media spectacle. Because I've actually, having lurked a lot of these anti-FNUC groups, they think that, actually, they're not real Prussian monarchists, but they're evil, right-wing Austrian painters. That's what they want. It's like they skip, they skip the 1910s and they go right to the 1930s and 40s in Germany. That's what these group of old men actually believe. And they're actually tied to Q, and they're tied to all these international far-right Austrian painter fan groups in the West, except for the ones in Ukraine, though. They're not real Austrian painter fans. But the ones in Russia are.
Even the ADL absolved them and called them no longer far-right. So I guess the stigma has been removed.
Right.
It's been expunged.
The ADL. you know who is far-right, though? Yay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he's being funded by Russia too.
Yeah.
So that's another piece of news that Ye wanted to talk to Putin. Like he wanted to have his Dennis Rodman and Kim Il. Well, not Kim Il.
Kim
What's the
Jong-un.
guy? Kim Jong. Yeah, he wanted to have his Kim Jong Un, Dennis Rodman moment. And said, you know what, I could go probably and talk to Putin. And of course,
especially when Ye broke the story that Musk is actually half Chinese. That was a pivotal moment. Putin would sit down and listen to what he had to say.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, but the ones in Ukraine, those ones, the funny symbols and the Zig runes, they're not actually far right. They don't actually believe in, they're being funded by by those.
This was a preemptive strike. That's what this was. It was. It was. The press has already begun name calling them. So you're going to have a completely tainted court case.
Oh no, these old men, they're not going to have a real court case. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the trucker inquiry here in Canada. Do you actually believe that they're going to go against Trudeau? No, of course not. This is how it works, especially in Germany. You have to realize the insane anti-speech, anti-right-wing laws they have in Germany, and why they fund these international anti-FNUC groups. I mean, it's incredible. I mean, they're worse than Britain. Okay, they're worse than Britain. Yeah.
Magnitudes worse.
Yeah. Because in Britain, you could still have people that can shitpost a little bit in public, but not in Germany. No, I mean, if you're a right-wing person in Germany, I know you feel pride in your history and your country, but I don't know, maybe you might have to move. Things are bad. I'm not that I would encourage people moving from their native lands, but I'm just saying that things are particularly bad if you're someone even nominally of a conservative or right-wing persuasion in Germany. And you probably know this already. I don't have to tell you.
Yeah.
But anyways, go ahead. You were gonna say?
Oh, I'm just saying that this is basically a preemptive move. They know which parties will most likely begin complaining very soon, right? That's part of the reason why they blew up the Nord Stream pipelines. So it would be conservatives and right-wingers who would probably be the first to protest.
Well, that's what Duran thinks, that it's to stem the future protests when things get.
Oh, okay, that's good to hear. One of the first things I thought of was they're going to go after the ADF after this.
Yeah.
Guilt by association. Wait a minute, you're far right too.
And it would be far from the first right on their offices.
Your based lesbian leader is trying to topple Germany and return us to the Fourth Reich.
Well, she's gonna have a very fashy Hugo Boss uniforms in her lesbian Austrian painter. There was actually lesbian erotica of a particular Austrian painter variety. Did you know this?
I did not know this.
I wish I didn't.
That's true. It's true. In the 70s, there was a lot of lesbian erotica of that variety. But anyways, moving on. Can you imagine her though in like the bondage Never mind. Don't worry about it.
This is a signature Geo moment.
Hey, that was like last year we read the Carolyn Ellison Pin the Wheel erotica on Digital Archipelago. My fans really love that. The Geo subs really love that. Yeah. So in Germany, though, what do you think is going to happen? Though, do you think like going into the winter? I mean, that's always an uncertainty. I mean, like you said, I think we said this last time that the winter this year won't be particularly bad, but by next year, I mean, there's deindustrialization happening in Germany from what I
Well, I'm glad you say that because it brings me into my next news item. The good news is German gas demands have fallen, which makes the situation a bit more favorable, but they're falling because industry is fleeing the country like rats from a sinking ship.
Yeah. We talked about this when George Mitchell was on the show last week. There will be just an enormous disinvestment in Germany. Its industry is finished, and you have all those. Like, just to put things into perspective, right? So Germany was this great industrial base. It was built back up, and it's like the Visegrad 4 group was its largest trading base because they built components for its mainline industrial base, particularly for cars, but not only cars. So it had more combined trade with Poland, Slovakia, Czech, and Hungary. And that's gone. Poland in particular just is, I don't know, the level of opportunism is just remarkable. They want World War II reparations, which, from what I understand, Germany has already paid, but they want more. And like,
dude, you mean the entirety of East Prussia ceded to Poland? Is that enough for
broke.
you?
They're broke. They're not even going to need your factories anymore. Like, for your component parts. Like, does Poland think it's going to get cheap gas? Like, Poland worked tirelessly to stop all pipelines that avoided going through Poland and Ukraine,
even if it's
because they wouldn't get transit, because they wouldn't make money on the transit fees, right? And so they complained really, really hard, right? Not necessarily to stop trade with Russia, although they made it look like that, but that they would get a bigger cut. They're well aware there's nowhere in Europe that can replace the gas that they lost now. And again, it's very similar to the Germans. On the one hand, doing and saying things that suit the U.S., and on the other hand, trying to get an upper hand in terms of economic growth in their own country. And so, so Germany is done now. And that gas coming in from Norway, which, remember, it was announced the day after Nord Stream pipelines were blown up. Wasn't that, what a coincidence, right?
Yes, the
that's not
going
to be enough. Like, you can have your component parts, but like, who are you going to build them for? Like, all those parts will now have to go to China or the U.S.
Yeah, apparently the U.S. is going to strip.
And you're going to pay more. You're going to pay more for energy, anyways. Like, how does that help you? It's this, cutting off. What's the phrase?
But it's anti-fascist industrialization. That's what matters, though.
That's what matters. Yes,
exactly.
Making Morgenthau proud.
Exactly. Making Morgenthau proud. Because the Russians, the real fascists. That's what really matters. No, but it's true. Maybe Canada can get some factories out of this. Who knows?
That's very likely. There's going to be a total brain drain in Germany. You're going to have people fleeing Germany with, good education and training and experience.
Excellent education.
Yeah, we touched on that when George Mitchell was on. George Michael was on?
Yeah.
Did he try, we had the ghost of George Michael.
He offered Constantine a blowjob.
Oh, God.
Can neither confirm nor deny.
No, because if you look at the Germans actually have a superior education system certainly compared to like North America. Because what they do is they have a lot of trade schools that they encourage, because for those who don't know, to get into academia in Germany is incredibly hard, right? Even harder than England, harder than America even.
It's like an elimination process.
Yeah, you have to write all these essays. You have to like really just it's like it's war by attrition more or less. By the time you have your PhD and whatever, it's a war of attrition. So Germany, what they do is they have all these trade schools that start from the time that you're young, that basically like what the Western world should be doing, which is to encourage kids to go into trades and to go into industries. But all of that's predicated on their native industrial capacity, which is like one of the only places left in continental Europe with a huge industrial output. But that's no more. And so now you have a lot of highly educated Germans and Turks that are going to essentially, they have no industry to go to because their whole German education system and economy was geared into filling those roles. And it was brilliant.
Yes.
The Germans have a superior, because I truly believe, and I'm a product of the Canadian academic system, although most Canadian academics would balk in horror at that. But I think university admissions should at least be slashed by half, in my opinion. No Zoomer needs to suffer the way us millennials suffered by pretending that our boomer parents, they forced us to go to higher education. Most people do not deserve nor need to go to higher education. There has to be an alternative. And Germany had, up until recently, a very solid alternative, but one that was predicated on the salience of their industrial economic system, which is now being evaporated because I guess, they just have to follow America's lead. And so what are German kids going to do? What are German Zoomers going to do? Are they going to mimic America? I guess they're going to, I don't know, they're going to have more humanities majors in Germany now. I guess, like, what's the other option? But you know what I mean? Like, it's just, you go ahead. I'm just, the more I think, like, the black pilling nature of Germany, it's just, man, it's terrible. I guess the British won. The Anglo-Americans won. So,
the British lost their entire empire, but they're going to get even with Germany.
That's like that meme I saw of like the German Aryan overman. Like, he gets bombed in Dresden, but it's like the world news focuses on like the crying baby in England, and of course the baby is Oswald Mosley. You know what I mean?
That's pretty good.
Yeah. The Anglos always have to one up the Germans, man. Yeah.
That cousin rivalry, the far-flung German tribes on the Isles, they just need to prove themselves to their long lost family, and the world has suffered for it. The world has suffered dearly.
Exactly. But what's going to happen though if there is a full-scale German deindustrialization? Like, what else can they do? Just become like, like every other little pissantty country in continental Europe? I mean, what's going to happen?
Yeah, that's exactly it. That is what.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's the primary goal. And just from Germans I've talked to, I'm not going to name any names, the destinations I've heard that are enticing are Norway and Argentina. So I guess Argentina better bulk up for another German wave. Even though I don't know how realistic that is, I don't know how widespread that is, but it does seem like, at least from the ones I've talked to, which is going to be a very, very narrow sample population of certain type of people, it does look like at least temporary emigration is the move in consideration.
If they move en masse to Argentina, good luck having a diverse soccer team. It's over.
Yeah, it's over. It's over. It's funny because a lot of Italians moved to Germany back in the 70s. Maybe the Germans will move to Italy now. But you know what I mean? Like, that's tragedy. It's like, look at the history of the Germanic peoples. Look at how they basically helped found, in part, integrally, what European, Faustian civilization is.
Yes.
And like, look at what they're being reduced to. It's like, it's a tragedy. If you're German, if you're listening to this, I mean, you should be pissed. You should be like unbelievably angry because you had a chance. And you know what I mean. I don't want to say anything I will regret, but you know what I mean. I feel a deep sympathy for the Germans. It's terrible. But unfortunately, I think that in some ways this was planned from the very beginning after the war. I truly believe this. I
Oh yeah,
believe
they
that
could
that was
never
always
let
yeah, yeah.
they could never let Germany after this become independent.
No,
That could
never.
never be allowed to happen again.
No,
I mean,
no.
hell, it's in the NATO unofficial slogan about keeping the Germans down. It was very clear from the start. However, I don't think many people, myself included, anticipated it going to this degree. And
I
I
know.
mean,
No.
ultimately, it was an acceptable system when Germany could be a regional manager of the American Empire over Europe. They could be allowed to have some degree of prosperity then. But when that started to fall apart, when the American Empire started to fall on hard times, enter rough waters, the potential for these regional managers, especially Germany, to
To go off
to
script.
go off script to forge their own path, that had to be put down, and that had to be put down fast. And even faster than some of the other regional managers, some I think of, such as a Japan or Turkey. I have no doubt that if they make similar moves, they will incur similar consequences. But Germany was the first one to step out of that line. Germany was the first one. I mean, even going back to before things got to where they were, their level of cooperation with Russia, although at the time in the 90s, 2000s, when it looked like Russia was going to be properly, quote unquote, integrated into the system, that was far more acceptable. It was tolerable after the Maidan,
Mhm.
after Crimea, but
Mm.
after this war, it was choosing between, do we let Germany continue on this path and possibly lose it, or do we scuttle the ship? And we all see which option they chose.
Right, because I mean, the Germany would have had this fate had the Soviet Union crumbled right after World War II,
Yeah.
or Stalin would have agreed to go along with the Marshall Plan. Uh, Germany's fate would have been very different than the one it enjoyed up until the September of this year. The only reason it was allowed to build itself up, well, I mean, not the only reason. One is they're very proficient. They are people who, like them and the Swiss and the Austrians, they literally make the best tooled machines in the world.
Very
They have
industrious.
very industrious. They've had a history of this for centuries. It is not like something that just happened in the 20th century.
Hmm.
It's been a tradition of theirs. In Europe, they have a reputation for this. My grandfather was always enamored with the Germans, always enamored about their capabilities. Lived through both world wars, although he was a very young child, just at the end of World War One. But just to put into perspective, so that would have been their fate if the Soviet Union hadn't balked at America's Marshall Plan offer, and Russia didn't crumble in the 90s. It didn't crumble in the first 6 months of this war, and they had to pull the plug. If it did, who knows? It would all have to depend on what kind of new leader Russia would have gotten if it economically failed, and Germany would have been in a even sweeter spot at that point per se, right? But they would always have to be um, there will always be suspicion around them.
I mean,
Yeah.
once again, going back 150 years, the primary goal has been to keep that rift between Germany and Russia alive. And now, especially with the
Yes.
structure of Europe, where Germany, well, at least up until, say, this past year, was the heart of Europe, was the economic engine of Europe, a potential integration between the two would have been an integration between Russia and Europe, completely marginalizing the American role in Europe for the past 75 years, which is completely unacceptable to Washington and to its collaborators.
And they were preoccupied in the Middle East at that time as well. So that's what I mean by really when you can say, and I know this is making a metaphor for other, other shibboleths of the current regime ideology. But when you look at the sort of anti-fascist world order, Germany is like the gaping wound that needs to be dilated every a decade or so, in the sense of they cannot be permitted to be the economic powerhouse of Europe. Even when they were, they still have to have some sort of mental parasite wedding them to America, more or less. And the German people, I mean, really, it's astonishing to me because the German people, they're such that you could give them any sort of political system and they would make it work. You know what I mean? To see them be reduced to what they are now is astonishing. And I think that when it comes right down to it, the sort of global ideologies propelling this sort of strategic weakening of their actual power. And it's really incredible. And nowadays, I think that with the war and everything, I mean, maybe this is the final straw. This is, I hate to say it, but maybe this is the end. But, you know.
Yeah, it reminds me of that painting by Goya, Saturn
Yeah.
eating his children.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But Germany, you know, I mean, if that were to have happened, if they were to improve relations with Russia, they would have kept their industrial capacity. This questions even talking about the current regime as an empire, because even the Romans, even the Greeks, even well, maybe in China it was very much an intra conflicting thing, but it seems that every empire at least nominally benefits their clients and their managers in different regions.
Yes.
But to just suck dry even their regional managers just doesn't make any sense, while the population in America is being sucked dry as well. So, you know.
Right. And, you know, you can see in this new world that's emerging, America's not the only game in town. And it's why countries like Saudi Arabia, India, China, at first, when this war started, everybody thought it would just be China, and for how long? And now we're seeing it's like, no, this is looking permanent. And but what was American diplomacy? I mean, it preceded Biden, okay, but he exacerbated the direction that it was on, anyways. And it's America's diplomatic policy with India and Saudi Arabia was the same that it had for Europe. You're going to do this or else, you know, or you could bring up the Solomon Islands, right? If you're a big enough and independent enough country, you don't have to, because they're not the only game in town now. You have a choice. And really, like, it can't be overstated just how important Xi Jinping's visit to Saudi Arabia was. I mean, you know, the king showed up, not just the prince, right? And he's a very old, frail man. He went to the tarmac to meet Xi Jinping. And that tells you everything about which direction Saudi Arabia is going to go. Not to mention that, you know, all trade now will not involve of oil will not involve the U.S. dollar.
I mean, people keep saying this is an exaggeration whenever I say it, but by definition, the petrodollar is dead. It has been for several months now, ever since Saudi Arabia started making these overtures to China. And keep in mind, a lot of this improvement of relations with China and with Russia goes back to about 2018. It goes back before the start of this war. You saw these shifts underway. Now, this war has accelerated it because it has created a very, very dichotomous view of the world, because you're either for this or you're against this. So it hasn't left much room for people in the middle. And when forced to choose, we saw the decision they made. And while the petrodollar still, of course, oil being still traded in the dollar does exist, and while it still does buoy up a large part of the U.S. economy, the idea that it's this exclusive currency for global energy trade, for global oil trade, well, that idea is dead. So at least that aspect of the petrodollar is dead. And look, I don't foresee the Saudis refusing to trade oil in the dollar at any time in the near future. But in terms of having that complete dominance over it, that is gone, and it's not coming back anytime soon, if ever.
Oh man, because that's what I mean. Like, what's I mean, it's bound to unstabilize the region as well. If you look what's happening with Iran, you know, I mean, Netanyahu is back in power. So what's America gonna do if they lose Saudi Arabia? I mean, they probably won't completely lose Saudi Arabia, but I mean,
they will lose revenues that Saudi Arabia used to provide for them.
Yeah.
But I think it will be over time, it could be more than that. Saudi Arabia, again, has called for normalization of relations with Iran. Iran itself has delivered weapons to Armenia for the first time. They're serious about this Kurdish problem because this was a Kurdish woman that apparently died, and most of the protests are Kurdish, and you're seeing a kind of a coordinated effort. Maybe it's not coordinated, but it could be interpreted that way between Turkey and Iran.
Oh, a lot of those protests in Iran glow. I mean, the funeral.
Yeah.
But the fact the Kurdish element in it is it's something there. And well, how was the relationship between the Kurds and the Saudis? How was that? Like they switched right over time, or?
I don't know what kind of attention the Saudis pay the Kurds at all. As far as I know,
much.
The Israelis do, but not the Saudis.
Oh, of course, yeah. These because they're both wholesome chunk. Well, not Israel, but depends who you talk to in terms of like wholesome chungus nationalism. But yeah.
Oh, they have a massive love affair with each other. You see so many Kurdish rallies and so many Kurdish demonstrations with the Star of David banner and the Sun banner side by side. And it's a complete infatuation. I'm sure it is lopsided on the side of Kurds.
It's worse than the Indians.
Oh, it's worse than the Indians. I mean, because at least the Indians have showed some pragmatism in recent months and years, so you can give them that much. But the Kurds, I mean, let's put it this way. As early as 2003, they were smuggling Iraqi oil to Israel. And that's, I mean, the Iraq War, don't get me wrong, was fought for oil, but it was fought for Israeli supply of oil.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's right.
But that's what I mean. What's the third worldist left going to do? Because they love the Kurds as wholesome Chungus freedom fighters against the evil theocratic Iranians, but they also love the Palestinians as wholesome Chungus freedom fighters against the Israelis.
See,
so
I think I think what's happened is the real left, the
new liberals,
right, or like the real spirit of the age is degeneracy in the West. It's not any of this. Like when we were talking about the so-called fake German coup, it reminded me of in the 70s there was now I knew them as the Baader Meinhof group or Red Army faction, right? About 4 years ago, Michael Jones did a video about them.
The Baader Meinhof. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, I remember that video.
Right. Now,
they infiltrated folk music, if I remember, as well in Europe. Yeah.
Right. And now they killed politicians, right? Like they hijacked a plane that went to Ethiopia, and there were commandos that stormed the plane. It was now the weird thing is when I was watching that video, all of this stuff came back to me. I remember as a kid literally watching these events.
My old man remembers that plane hijack
on the news. I literally remember that. That was weird, a weird flashback, and So where was I going with this?
No, but that's what Alexander McCoy was saying about. He's like, I remember in the 70s, Germans had way more tact than they did now, and I'm like, wow, gee, I wonder why the German government had more tact against like literal left-wing terrorists versus now against like old men that are Prussian. I wonder, could it be that this is a fucking glowy psyop? I don't know. Maybe.
Yeah, it's essentially what that gang, that group was fighting for was like working class wages. Yeah. And this is also one of the infamous videos that Michael Jones did, where he either coined the phrase "global homo" or "America the gay disco."
The global gay disco, transient sterile relations. Yeah.
Oh man, that's so brutal.
I love
literally everybody uses it. He could retire now if he wanted to.
Oh man, I love the way he said the anus is not a sex organ; it's transient sterile relations. Germany has a long history of anal sex, but that's besides the point. Yeah.
So, So
I don't think the people that I don't think the people, these old men are glowies. I think that they were probably just like having a group chat or something.
yes,
Oh,
yes.
it's a
It'd
rehash.
be nice if we were back in power. And then the German government's like, wow, this is amazing. Oh, sorry, Connor.
It's a rehash of the Gretchen Whitmer plot, where you had these right-wing
Yes.
guys in Michigan
Yeah.
saying like, "Oh, I hate the governor." Fed shows up. It's like, "Hey, have a 22 rifle. They're armed. They're arms. Arrest them. Arrest them."
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
a replay of that.
Yeah, so I think the West is just degenerate. They'll get bored of they'll eventually begin to hate the Palestinians, because the Palestinians are not pro-gay marriage. They don't have trans kids reading hour.
And at least the Kurds have lesbians.
Yeah. Well, at least, yeah.
Some of them look good, though.
Take a page out of the Kurdish playbook, dudes. Get some lesbians in there.
Get some Palestinian cross-dresser. Like, get some Palestinian drag time story hour. And then maybe the Israelis won't bomb you as hard.
You imagine, like the next CCTV camera that shows
it won't be
an Israeli soldier is killed.
Yeah, it won't be a Palestinian children's ward. It will be a Palestinian drag show.
The yassification of the PLO is underway.
Well, that's why the Israelis, it's funny, during the Intifada, like how like the Hezbollah, they were actually like protecting like Orthodox churches and Coptic churches, and of course the Israelis could never have any, they couldn't tolerate that, so it's like they had to bomb the churches directly. But that's just
typical of them.
But that's what they mean. Like it's the Palestine. It's like, who's the more wholesome Chungus nationalism? Is the Palestinians or Kurds? Yeah. But you were leading up to a point where I'm very sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I just meant to say it's kind of like that meme of the Occupy Wall Street movement, marching with banners down the street, and then you have the gay pride parade 6-7 years later. That's what happened. It just got switched out, right? Now, if people can find that video by E. Michael Jones, it may not be on his channel. If you type in, I'll spell it for people because it's one of the most enlightening videos that you're going to see, because these people didn't want Germany in NATO. They didn't want nuclear energy. They wanted higher wages for the working class. It's starting to sound like Austrian painter stuff. Anyhow, so these guys are left wing
for working class people. That's total Nazball right there. You got to get rid of that.
Yeah. So it's BAADER MEINHOF group. Sometimes it's called the Red Army faction.
But Baader-Meinhof was the media term.
That's how I always knew it. The Baader-Meinhof gang. Anyways, the one that was done by E. Michael Jones, I think it's only like 18 minutes long. It's really good. He made history. He coined some very important phrases that we still use today. God bless him.
And God bless Nobody TM for making E. Michael Jones popular with the video you. So there you go. But what was he saying? I remember listening to this, but he was saying like there was Gladio, but then there was also funding of these left-wing groups as well. Like, I forget.
Well, I mean, in the video, he talks about, for instance, how after this whole, because there was the whole hijacking and everything.
Yeah.
Germany doubled its police force, its intelligence, a new headquarters was built, and, basically more police state, right? So they use that perfectly. But the other thing that he mentions is, and what we're living through right now is the after effects of Foucault's decision at Death Valley, where he basically joined with corporations. He's, he said, like, if you guys are willing to, accept all our, homo stuff, we'll stop pushing for, unions and fair wages and all that kind of stuff. And essentially, so that's what I mean. The West is essentially, it's just a degenerate faction that is the the religion of the West. That is the only thing it can export.
Yeah.
And the threats behind it, which um, underpin its strength. So yeah, that's all I had.
No, but that's the thing though, and then it's like you do have like the specter of like left-wing groups in Europe, but then also the specter of like gladio nationalists nowadays, and so it's like
Yeah,
quite interesting the ideological breakdown that's happening.
mm-hmm.
Like even we even said this about the ideological breakdown in Russia, like it's that video in Izium about the child organ harvesting, where it's like you have a Russian commander talking about this is what we're here, we're fighting global Satanism, but yet he's got the communist red star on his cap, like it's incredible, like it's
because for them it's not like they're not Westerners. For them it's all like this historical association. This is what the army that defeated the people who invaded us. This is the flag that they flew.
For them,
we can't reject that. We would reject their own victory. We would reject their own salvation out of our own hands. So, et cetera, et cetera. I just think like, for Western-minded, ideologically persuaded people, that just it doesn't make sense. I mean,
it violates the computing program.
Yeah. But it is what it is, and it's like I don't know what I mean. People still talk about it, I guess, but I guess they always will.
Yeah, the ideological breakdown, but in terms of Merkel, though, I mean, is it just to save her reputation, like the absolute?
I think so.
Like the desert of her rulership for so many years.
She's a badass.
I tricked them.
I fooled Putin.
but what's crazy though is that when you see these like lib journalists on Twitter that hover around the Ukraine issue, and like you see people like fucking Gary Kasparov or whoever, it's like they chirp about the rules-based order. But if you're admitting that essentially a deal done in the open in public is just an elaborate kayfabe to make sure that the Ukrainians rearm themselves, I mean, isn't that a flouting of like the whole like post-war international rules-based liberal order that we have to be tolerant of each other and everything has to have this sort of Karl Popperin cult of transparency to everything?
Well, I'm sorry,
I mean, it's ridiculous.
But because you brought it up, I always have to mention that Gary Kasparov was a founding member of the Nazbol Party. Fun fact.
Was he?
I know he was in a lot of the groundwork with the and it came out about a year ago. He hasn't touched the issue, and it's funny because it gets brought up a lot, and I find it personally very entertaining that he was.
Dude, you were Nazbol. What happened?
What happened to you?
I mean, even Arestovich used to meet with Dugin, so
yeah. It's funny though how Kasparov probably thinks that Dugin's like Rasdugan now. So it's like but what I mean. Like there was this. Let me read you. I have this screen cap because I was going to beef about it on Telegram, where I save all of my spicier rants than Twitter. But of course, I mean, now that Herr Musk is in charge, maybe things are better. But there was some fucking guy. Yeah, here it is. Gabrielis Landsbergis from Lithuania or Latvia. What's the one with the yellow, green, and red?
Lithuania.
That's Lithuania.
Lithuania, of course. The Chihuahua nations, right? The tactic of leaving Russia undefeated and ready for future partnership is toxic. Toxic, yeah. But when Lithuania sided with a certain regime in World War II, that wasn't toxic. It leads to calls to end the war by negotiation instead of ending it with Ukrainian victory. Some even suggest Ukrainian territorial concessions to the invaders as a gift. This isn't how the rules-based international order works. But it worked in Iraq and Afghanistan, though. Russia shouldn't get invited to peace, quote-unquote, negotiations as a reward for brutally invading, occupying, murdering, and genociding neighbors again and again. The creeping normalization of Russia's actions... this is shit-lib lingo par excellence. The creeping normalization of Russia actions is fundamentally wrong. Also misguided is the belief that current security architecture of multilateral, regional, and global organizations must be preserved as the best we have. So I guess an unironic, like a mask off imperial model is what the Lithuanians want. International organizations completely failed to prevent conflict of a magnitude unseen in Europe since World War II. At the very least, there must be change within these organizations, but we should not rule out possibility of some organizations disappearing and new ones forming. So this is the specter of anti-fascism from World War II.
That was
Is
really a beautiful passage from the Talmud. Thank you for that.
Oh my
like
God.
the only reason why they think everything is permissible, all lying and deceit
Yes.
is permissible
Every
against
action
Russia,
against Russians is permissible.
because they're Russians. It doesn't
Yeah.
come down to anything else. It's just because they're Russians.
But see, this is how the liberal regime manages contradictions. Anti-racism and anti-fascism are the building blocks of the global quote-unquote rules-based system from these multilateral organizations in World War II. But when it comes to Russophobia, I guess they're Asiatic orcs. They're not really Europeans, and they're just mud people that come from Tartars and Mongols, and it's like they're evil. That they're it's like all the stereotypes of the Russo-Mongolian hordes, right? But how do you navigate that contradiction? You make them this unique state of exception that must be destroyed. And again, like World War II, the international community and the international institutions failed, and therefore we have to have something different. Unironic American imperialism. I guess that's the answer that they want. I mean, apparently this guy, he's some kind of he's like the head foreign minister or something for Lithuania. So I'm not surprised. He's up there, so he's echoing the sentiments of the government of these, the Baltic nations. The Baltic nation. Yeah.
Yeah, Baltic nations.
Well, yeah, I get them confused with the Balkans, but Baltic.
Yeah.
The Baltic client states. Thank you very much.
Baltic, the Chihuahua nations. Yeah. But that's what I mean. Like the whole thing about, we're normalizing Russia's, like every fucking war in human history after the fact, after everything's settled, this is what happens. There's no such thing as a uniquely evil aberration when it comes to human history. You know what I mean? It's the language of it is this like shitlib American academic geese that is so intolerable to me. It's incredible. It's like, what are you gonna do then? Are you just gonna hate the Russians forever? Are you gonna like, even if you are Ukrainian, it's like, this line of thinking is so destructive that I don't even have words for it. I'm just like, yeah. Wow, just wow. The right wing equivalent of wow, just wow. But yeah, sorry. Go ahead. Sorry.
I wish I could give proper credit to whoever said this, but they escaped me. So if you're listening, you know who you are. But they were pointing out that America has never had to seriously negotiate its way out of a conflict. That every time it has either been a total victory or running away from it, and that America has never had to go through a proper diplomatic process to reach a state of peace. And they went through all the way back to 1812, for that matter.
The Civil War, maybe?
I mean, even that was,
it was unconditional.
Yeah. It was, concessions had to be made after the fact, but the kind of regime that they tried to impose on the Reconstruction South, that's, I could go on all day about that, so I'll spare a lot of you that. But especially in 20th century conflicts, it has been a very lopsided peace process where it is America gets what it wants, or in rare exceptions like Vietnam, it turned tail and run.
But you know what's funny though is that during the Civil War, the Southerners, they thought they were the real Americans. Because America was essentially like the northern states were essentially importing its army from Ireland to fight the war. So they're like, they're not the real Americans, right? And I know that I was talking about this, I think, with Martin. You can even make a case for that the Southerners, they truly thought that they were the sort of carrying on the legacy of a lot of what the American founding fathers. It wasn't like they hated America. Like, this is modern bullshit around the Civil War. They hated America and they wanted a different system. It's like, that's even veterans of the Civil War. they thought that they hated it because they were going to war with their brothers. You know what I mean?
Oh, I got some
It's yeah.
controversial Civil War opinions, even by the standards of people who would listen to the show.
No, but that's what I mean. Like, you even have people that originally were scholars that, especially during the Trump years, they had to soil themselves like fucking Ken Burns. Totally intellectually soiled himself because Orange Man broke his brain. But anyways, that's it. That's off topic. We're not. That's
Fuck
too
you know,
complicated.
The other interesting thing about the
I'm not
American
even American. It makes my blood boil. This propaganda. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say just a small fact about the American Civil War is that initially Lincoln wanted it to be limited. He thought he could negotiate, and then when that wasn't the case, like he went all in. Yeah, Grant, exactly.
But
wait, how do we talk about the Civil War? Oh yeah, America never negotiating.
Yes, America never negotiates its peace, so it has no fundamental understanding of how actually to negotiate a peace, as evidenced by we'll talk to Russia once they give all the concessions that we're demanding. Then we can enter negotiations.
Yeah, here's my no starter approach.
But we are approaching the 2.5 hour mark, so the last thing I do want to get into is the prisoner swap.
There's been a few of them.
But primarily the Victor Boot, what was it? Brittany Griner one?
Listen, controversial take. Who has done more great feats in the world? Victor Boot or Brittany Griner?
I mean,
what do you mean by doing feats?
Being a WNBA,
who has done more great things in this world in their life?
Being a WNBA player is stunning and brave. I will hear none of it. And look, but okay, I can't even keep up with this act. I'll just put it this way: this woman, and I've seen some questionable pictures. I will not get into details on this program for both my sake and yours. But this individual, let's just say, to put it politely, will hold political office by 2030. I almost guarantee it. I would bet
my
a
God.
large amount of money.
You're so
this.
right.
But me, she's got to fight off President AOC though.
Yeah, that's gonna be a brutal primary. I don't envy.
It'll be worse than Obama versus Hillary Clinton.
Yes, but I guarantee you this woman will hold some political office in some way, shape, or form before the end of the decade. But getting into the actual prisoner swap, of course, this had been in talks for a few months now. You did have this, and of course, Victor Boot, the so-called infamous arms smuggler, who turns out
British
actually
Foreign Office called him the Merchant of Death. I remember that when they were playing Lord of War on the History Channel back in the day. That was like the documentary accompanying it was about Victor Boot. And like that was the tagline. The British Foreign Office called him the Merchant of Death. I'll never forget that.
And an interesting tidbit I did learn the other day is apparently he did some work for the Pentagon during his so-called reign of terror. So
of course.
Yeah, it looks like story isn't quite cut and dry as it needed to be. Now, the main narrative, which I actually wanted to get into a little bit of this, out of a lot of the mainstream conservative spheres, was this Paul Whelan figure, who was a Marine convicted for spy charges in Russia, and that he should have been the prisoner swap, which of course led to snarky liberals saying, oh, well, why didn't Trump free him? Why didn't Trump just wave his magic wand and free him? And, I mean, getting into
he was best friends with Putin. Putin gave him the election.
I mean, I'm not going to pretend like I care about the American intelligence apparatus or what's in their so-called best interest.
Oh, this guy's a glowy. Who gives a shit?
Yeah, I mean, but, like, I'm just saying, like, speaking completely pragmatically, it's like, that would have been a fair trade, and who's
more important to the American government structure? That guy or Brittany Griner?
Oh, so, in terms of the great
based
American...
on what we've been talking about, Brittany all the way.
Yeah, in terms of the great American tapestry, who gets more weaved into that is certainly the...
Who's symbolically more the essence of America currently?
The BIPOC, whatever the term is, LGBTQCIA, who got imprisoned for smoking the devil's lettuce by Putler. That's certainly, in terms of what's more narratively important, that's more important than a white intelligent field agent, if we're just putting it that way. He's a relic of the past. He he should have stayed in the 80s, blah, 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 blah.
He represents the old America.
Yeah,
This is the new. This is the new civil rights America.
He represents Ronnie Reagan's America, so we can't have that. But
being a spy in Russia, that's total Ronald Reagan. You can't have that.
yeah, that's no. What's next? Cowboy hats is disgusting. But I mean, I'm getting a little off track here. But honestly, given at least on paper the lopsidedness of this deal, in my opinion, that's enough to really not make a story, especially considering the fact I, once again, really don't care about the American empire, its intelligence apparatus. Now, look, if I actually had some investment left in America, which, kind of dissipated in this past couple of years for reasons I'm sure you can imagine, I mean, I probably would be a little bit mad about this, but honestly, I can't really draw any real emotion out of myself, except it is comical, and really, it's the exemplification of the American empire. This is the ideal citizen. This is who you should aspire to be. This is the one they're going
She's
to fund
the perfect
press.
regime subject.
Oh, absolutely. And it's, yes, this androgynous, BIPOC, LGBTQ CIA, devil lettuce smoker. What more could Brandon's America want?
There was this journalist I blocked that, or some blogger that said that the Republicans don't actually care about this Navy intelligence officer, but really it's all about white supremacy, because how dare they see a bi-POC woman flourish and get released heroically from the evil fascist Russia. That's really what it's about. They don't really care about this, terrible exchange. Actually, it's a good exchange because Victor Bout doesn't really matter compared to Brittany Griner. So,
even though some of the interviews he did after getting out were pretty funny, he came out sounding like like an American paleoconservative and
like a normie, like a normie comic. Like he's been watching Sean Hannity in prison with his commissary.
I mean, somebody had made the point that like you have people who come over
I
here.
can't believe it. They have 27. They have 75 genders there.
It's crazy.
Crazy. I do wrestle.
America, you okay? You used to be so cool. What happened?
I used to love selling Americans arms. What happened? I love getting
speaking of Ronnie Reagan's America, somebody maybe had a few wrong impressions, but it was pretty normie-con thing to point out. But I did think I did think it was interesting that somebody brought this to my attention. One of many of the standard conservative blue check accounts on Twitter. Not that the blue check really means anything. It's $8 a pop now.
It's like when Putin mentioned cancel culture.
Yes, exactly. They made the point that like you have these people who come from all over the world, get like their green cards, go to American universities, and all they can do is kvetch about America. Oh, it's so horrible, white supremacy, blah 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 blah. And then you have a man who spent 14 years in a high security American prison. It's like, oh, it's so sad what happened to this great bastion. And I can't believe that they think there's 72 million genders now. It was just. It was a very, not really anything newsworthy, just very comical, and I think it does play into that great tapestry that I was getting at earlier, how just completely nonsensical things have gotten, and really, I wish I had more to say about this story, but once again, as somebody who's completely disinvested in the American empire, or any of its operations abroad, especially given the element of this Paul Whelan character, I don't have much to say. I'm sorry if that disappoints any of you.
Well, Victor Bout is really a hero over time. Oh no, I'm kidding.
Oh no! Hey, your words, not mine. That's on you.
No, I'm joking. He helped slaughter millions of people through his arms sales. But like they said in World of War, he's like the American government pushes more product in a week than he does in a year. So I mean,
that's ignoring his deals with the Pentagon.
Yeah.
Bolton lost his mind. He said that this was a clear defeat and a victory for Russia. How could they do this? He's out of touch.
Yeah.
Like he's living somewhere, both mentally and physically, where the pause is just not relevant. And that's the only reason he could say something so ridiculous. And then I've seen other idiot influencers on TikTok. People have sent me this stuff. I wish they wouldn't.
Who?
I can't get into it. He's a friend of mine.
No, but I mean, which influencers did they send you?
I don't know these people. I'm not on TikTok. I don't care about TikTok. But people saying the Russians were never going to release Whelan. It's like, no, the Americans were never going to take Whelan.
Yeah.
It's the reverse. like, it's important to remember that Whalen was part of a sting operation, right? He'd been retired. He'd been out of the Marines for, I don't know, something like over 10 years when he was arrested. Somebody gave him a flash drive, and he was very quickly afterwards apprehended. And the flash drive, lo and behold, had like sensitive documents and whatever. To be fair, the same thing happened to Boot. He was apprehended, I believe, in Thailand, and then he was extradited to the US to serve there. And that's what infuriated the Russians. So now the Russians had Whalen and the Americans had Boot. And all this time there could have been a negotiation. I'm sorry, but the Russians figured out that this gigantic trans black woman, or whatever the thing it is, that thing
Is Brittany Griner trans?
That's
I
the
don't
that's
know.
the
She looks like a
speculation.
man. I mean, she knew the law that you cannot smoke pot or hash in Russia, and she flaunted it. She just thought, well, I'm an American. I can get away with this. And she was arrested and served for a part of her sentence in a penal colony where she had to sew uniforms for the Russian military.
Oh, that's what this journalist said. That's what this journalist said. I wish I could find it. Said that
it's so beautiful.
Republicans hate that a strong woman of color criticizes American racism,
Whatever.
and that we have to like exchange Victor Boot for this patriotic Rosa Parks of our generation.
Yeah.
So
people
I mean, they're right,
who,
but I mean, they're wrong, but they're right in terms of they're right about what America is. But I just fundamentally disagree with their precepts. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, they're right for the wrong reasons.
Russia couldn't figure out how to get Boot out of prison until they found like one of their most sensitive subjects, one of their most sensitive
I wonder if like Lavrov
representatives
just like went to Putin and he's like, in America they worship black people, right? Putin's like, I didn't know that. Like
you don't know Liesel? You don't know Liesel? Big American woman. She loves chicken. She loves to eat and play music. You don't know Liesel? The flute, crystal flute.
Liesel, who is Liesel? Is she symphony orchestra?
Vladimir, where is your mind?
Okay, so this does remind me of something I did see on Twitter, and I can actually give this account credit because I remembered who it was. So this is at Tsarist Wolf 1389. I bet you can't guess where he might be from, saying that Vucic, and I'm going.
He's my buddy.
I'm going to paraphrase
It's a good
because
account, actually.
I'm not sure how YouTube sensitive is about this, but Vucic should arrest some LGBTQ BIPOC athletes and trade them to free Mladic and Kazardik.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, that seems to be the going rate, and other countries would be wise to take. See, while the U.S. dollar may be buoyed up by the stripping of European copper wire from their homes, gypsy style, the prisoner exchange rate with the United States is as low as it has ever been. So if anyone is looking to make any good deals, I don't know if there's any foreign dignitaries listening to us, and of course I'm not officially advising you because I don't want to violate any U.S. law, but if you just so happen to hear any of this, I'm just saying it seems to be that the exchange rate is not in favor of America right now. So do with what do what you will with that information.
For all people who are surprised, remember that the Build Back Better, you don't hear Build Back Better anymore, but the whole Build Back Better program, which gave money, both free money and loans, the only people who could qualify could not be white men.
That's right.
And they're still like wondering how could they choose this stupid basketball player
that hates America, by the way.
That hates America anyways, right? Instead of this guy who's been in prison longer and is more of an equal exchange. Well, I'll tell you why, because it's the same pause shit that America promulgates all over the world as it does domestically. So I don't know why people are like surprised, or there's a debate about which one was the right one, and you have people who are sympathetic about pot. The people who want pot legalized.
Well, pot's a national religion here in Canada.
Yeah. And so like they feel sorry for her. Oh, Russia's too hard on them. Just go F yourself. Fuck.
Why can't the world be like Canada?
Look, I'm so entitled. I'm going to break laws in a foreign country that we're already on bad footing with, and then be surprised when I get held as a political prisoner.
Yeah. Like, it's so arrogant.
Why can't it be like me, where there's a weed store right down the street from me?
Yeah,
on every corner.
You can stop there, and then you can stop by your, let's just say, your local maid program, and it's a wonderful day in Canada.
2 for 1. No, but they distribute it at the maid program.
Oh,
so you don't have to make 2 trips.
That is even better. I'm glad that they've German efficiency, Canadian style.
That's real Anglophone efficiency right there. Oh boy! But Brittany Griner, she's gonna be president one day, so buckle up, Buckaroo.
Yeah. Ooh, what a world!
What's her platform gonna be?
Exactly.
Who's gonna be your vice president?
Well, okay.
I mean, she hates Russia. She hates America. She's perfect.
Yeah, I think the you gotta get a Sandy Hook kid that's gonna be the vice president with her. You gotta get like David Hogg.
Who's the one who shaved her head? It's got to be that one.
Oh, Gonzalez.
Yeah. Perfect. And you see, it's gonna be
Gonzalez.
It's gonna be a landslide with all those 3M ballots against against DeSantis. See, he's not gonna stand a chance.
No. It's gonna be. I said this on with Prude. I said the future of the Republican Party will be gay Cubans that survived the 80s, and Herschel Walker's gay son, Christian. Christian Walker's going to run against Brittany Griner.
The election that, frankly, America deserves.
I love that guy's a champ, though. Like, he did the typical, Milo move where he's like, it was harder for me to come out as conservative than come out as gay. And on TikTok. God bless Christian Walker, man. But they, that's another thing too. I can't believe I knew that was gonna happen. They were gonna give it to Warnock. Like, come on, they're gonna, yeah. And it's what the thing is, it's a typical bullshit. Like, I think the problem is that like libs in America, they can't comprehend that the Republican Party can have like this is, I think, why they were terrified of Trump, is that they can't comprehend the sort of awakening Machiavellianism of the Republican voter base, because there was this, that Wahali Ali guy that worked for NBC or some liberal rag.
Yeah.
He said that when you look at it, Warnock's a pastor. Even though a lot of those are just like fake activists or not actual, religious scholars. And, Herschel Walker, forced his mistresses to have abortions and all this. And it's the hypocrisy of the evangelical vote. And actually, evangelicals in America worship white supremacy. That's what they really worship. They don't worship God. They worship white supremacy. But I'm thinking that, okay, it's like when they were guilt tripping evangelicals about Trump, because Trump would be like, he was really, kind of secular. Like, it's like, Trump, what's your favorite Bible passage? I like all of it. All of it's good. All of it's good. And so symbolically, the symbolic notion of a pure as the driven snow, purity spiral, Republican candidate, either Herschel Walker or Trump, right? The evangelicals, how dare they vote for Trump because he swears, and he talked about grabbing them by the pussy, and he said, he doesn't have a favorite Bible passage. Same with Herschel Walker. Like, he's a schizo that pressured his mistresses into having abortions. And, but here's the thing though. Here's the thing. If you're a Republican voter, are you going to vote for a guy like Warnock that wants to abort every second child that is conceived? Or are you going to vote for Herschel Walker, who may be a hypocrite in his personal life, but who's going to basically vote to end abortion in Georgia? Same with Trump. Trump, he swears he can't name a Bible verse to save his life, but his Supreme Court ended Roe versus Wade. So it's like...
I mean, and also compare that to the so-called principled Republicans like Mike Pence, who probably do
Yeah,
live a very
or
personally
Rod Dreyer.
upright life. Well, look at what they do policy-wise. Like, come
Yeah.
on.
Yeah, like Rod Dreyer, Mister. I'm a principled paleocon. Oh, but I'm going to dox the Christian nationalist people and like turn them to the fucking winds because how dare I associate with someone who may have contemplated racial politics in America? It's like these fucking people, like the David Frenches of the
As he
world.
writes for Pat Buchanan's magazine.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. If by the way, shout out to my friend Jay Burden. He did an excellent solo stream just calling out and just eviscerating Rod Dreyer. So I highly recommend that. Go to the Jay Burden channel. Rod Dreyer is the biggest fucking piece of shit I've ever seen. He's a coward. He refused to debate my friend Nathan Duffy, and he's doxing people that, you know, which I can't comprehend. If you truly are a Christian in America, okay, and you mean, and listen, I have problems with the Christian nationalist thing as well, theologically. But I'm saying that, would you not benefit from an idea like Christian nationalism if you are Rod Dreyer, if you're a paleo, I'm Mr. Paleocon, would you not benefit from people like Stephen Wolf, you know, being in, influencing people who are in positions of power in the Republican Party? This
It
just
depends.
shows that he's,
What we have to
yeah,
look at what Jesus said about the American Constitution
yeah.
before we go any further. It's just so stupid.
I mean, but no, seriously,
What did Jesus say about George Washington? So,
No, but he's like going out there and doxing people.
Oh, I know.
You know, like it's, yeah, but I know what you mean. I know what you mean. Go ahead.
It's that stupid dementia that they of theirs, right?
Yeah.
Now, I think, what was it? I wanted to bring something up. I've just lost my train of thought. Sorry. You guys go on.
President Grainer?
Oh,
no. Oh my God.
No, but you know what I mean by Machiavellianism. Like you.
Oh,
you
yes.
know,
This
who
is
gives
it.
a shit if they? Yeah.
The-
Go
the-
ahead. Go ahead. Sorry.
The best thing to like completely shut up a shit lib. Okay, so I'll give you an example of it. I've done many of them ever since, right? But you were talking about like certain groups being absolutely pragmatic and Machiavellian
Yeah.
to get who they need in power to get what they want, right? And okay, so I went with my cousin. This is some number of years ago. I was in Macedonia, and we you know, we went out for dinner, and he had a female friend of his that he knew, and she came along, and she actually got fired by a Soros group that she worked in. This is when they were doing the Czarna Revolucja in Macedonia. Anyhow, I don't, you know, I'd never met her or spoken to her. We're having dinner, and she brought up Putin, and she goes, Putin is, she goes, you know, Putin is corrupt. I go, yeah, that's okay. And she says, what do you mean? I'm saying, listen, my dear, every country is ruled by a mafia. Make sure it's your mafia.
It's true. It's true.
Right. And like her mind just blew. Her mind just blew. It's like, again, you brought up the exception, right? There's always an exception why we can't follow our own rules, why we have to appear like hypocrites.
Yeah.
This is an exceptional case, right?
Yeah.
Liberalism works, but only up until this point, and then we have to revert to something else in order to win, in order to reinstate liberalism.
Yeah, and the libs do this all the time. I mean,
yeah. So as soon as you go full Machiavellian with them, and it's just a Schmittian drive to power just as well as theirs, that's it. They lose their minds over it.
And I'll bring up again this Orrin McIntyre tweet I brought up with Prude on our show, where Ann Coulter said, "Is that what the lesson that they learned from since Trump is that they're just going to ban people that disagree with them off of social media?" And then Orrin McIntyre quote tweeted her and said, "Yeah, exactly. That's exactly the lesson that they learned." Like, are you a fucking retard? That's exactly the lesson that the libs have learned, is that they just want to ban you. Like, what? This is what I mean, the incapability of the average GOPer to realize that this is what you're up against. Like, they thought, you know, people that talk, like, it's the same deal with the whole psyop of the rules-based order. to end what we're talking about with Russia. Like I think even Putin suffers from this like conservatard brain. I hate to say it. Like it's, he just has a reverence for the West, obviously. And it's, I think that Putin is obviously more pragmatic than, say, these like hardcore Duginists or whatever that are like, oh, the West is evil and it's like they're terrible. It's like, yeah, a portion of the West is evil. The ruling class is evil. But I think Putin truly does still have this romantic attachment to like what European civilization is. And PaxTube did a great video on this recently. The anime YouTuber PaxTube did an excellent video on Putin's philosophy. I highly recommend. I want to get him on the show.
I think that's the first time anyone has ever said that string of words on the show.
Anime YouTuber PaxTube.
Yeah, I mean, that was the whole point of cutting off Russia, the attempt to cut off Russia culturally from Europe by banning every single cultural thing that it cuts them off from its historical ties to Europe. That was the whole point of it. It was to make them un-European.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's what he's attached to.
And do you think, like, final question, do you think this will force Putin to a more Eurasianist position? I mean, obviously, but
I think
obviously it already has.
Yeah. Which is a tragedy in a lot of ways. In some
I think whoever follows him will obviously know that for Russia's survival, they will have to continue this path.
Yeah.
I mean, he's just started, like he's starting another gas hub in Kazakhstan, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Well, he's already done one in Turkey, so it's just going to keep going this way.
Yeah.
I mean, any Russian-European cooperation, just final word here, is completely stifled because we all know that, not that I have too much faith in the Europeans on their own, but we all know that any decision they would make would have to be filtered through both Brussels and Washington.
Yes. Yeah, that's not going to happen anymore. That's done.
Yeah.
As ridiculous as it sounds, like Europe will have to find a way to keep its energy and continue as a modern society somehow by getting its gas and oil from like across the Atlantic, even though when it's like right there around them. So it's an economic bridgehead. Like that's essentially what it is.
Maybe us Canadians could benefit from this. Who knows? But then Trudeau didn't want to build the fucking gas hub.
Yeah. No, Germany must be punished.
If we let the Germans have economic self-sufficiency,
we lose.
The right wing wins. Yeah, we lose. They win.
That's right. That's right. If we let the Germans have economic self-sufficiency, the Freedom Convoy wins.
Yeah. The foreign influence of the Freedom Convoy was actually from Germany. So, that's not far from the truth because Bleep Sama managed to get a convoy protest in Finland going apparently.
Okay.
So yeah, I know he doesn't like me, but he's a funny guy. I can't hate Bleep Sama. I can't hate Bleep Sama. If he's listening to me right now, someone send him this clip. Say I say Bleep Sama, you're all right by my books, even though you probably don't like me because you think I'm a sugar cookie eating goblin. So it's all right. This has been great, boys. We gotta do. I know GSP. We're thinking of the end of the year stream.
Yes,
but we'll talk about it.
So. Yeah, we'll
do
this soon.
Jerusalem.
I had
you
to.
look at Israel. It's a fundamentally secular society. They're not, real. I gotta stop quoting The Believer. Like, my God. Oh boy.
But yes, that was a very successful little operation here. We did run a little long. We're coming up on the 3-hour mark, so I figured we better cut the cord here.
Yeah.
So, Gio, if you have any final words, any final plugs, the floor is all yours.
As always, go to my YouTube channel, Giant Productions. Most people know from Twitter, Giant Geo, and of course, patreon.com/Giant Productions. And on the 18th, I'm going to be on Millennial. I believe I'm at the top of the bill too.
Oh, wonderful.
So nice.
And I will say once again, give this man your money right now.
Thank you.
Give this man your money
manual typewriter
right now. Manual typewriter. Fancy that.
For your only hope for the future.
Wonderful. I love
your
it.
only hope
I love
for the
it.
future.
It's
R.I.P.
wonderful.
Francis C. Jack.
Well, what a legend, a titan among men. But
a schizo poster before there was schizo posting.
GSP, any final thoughts?
No, not really. We covered everything in depth.
Oh,
I
There
think.
you
absolutely.
go.
And we'll probably have to do a supplementary episode because we got really in depth to a lot of what we were doing.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
keep your
Yeah.
eye out for something else in the week. But we'll certainly be back.
Probably sooner.
Within the normal time frame. So thank you everyone for
Hmm.
tuning in to this wonderful episode of the War Report, and we will see you next time. And goodbye.
Goodbye.